Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we have got another open Q&A. I think what we'll do is from next week we'll start picking up on a sort of a theme to go through, some deep dives on the live streams, a few in a row. Perhaps we'll drop in a Lord of the Rings one. So I don't think we've done a Lord of the Rings one for a while. And then just start to deep dive into a few topics in Westeros. But today is an open Q&A, and as always, that means we're going to be dotting about. We will start with the Song of Ice and Fire questions. We've got quite a few Lord of the Rings questions coming up a little bit later as well. But let's just see how this goes. So let's go with Purple Feline first of all, saying good evening, Robert, and good evening to you too. Do you think we'll get the whole story in the stage play? Or might George R. Martin want to keep a little mystery for reveal in the main series? I'd love to hear what you think it will cover. And then Hermione also says, hello, Robert. I heard there is another stage play coming about the reign of the Mad King. Did I hallucinate this news? If not, what are your thoughts? Well, as far as I'm aware, there is only one stage play that is anywhere in the works. Perhaps there might be another. Who knows? But for now, we've got one. And that one is going to be focusing in on the tourney at Harrenhal and perhaps a little bit of the aftermath. The official blurb kind of hinted maybe we'll get a little bit about what follows. I think we'll have to wait and see on that one. But what will it cover? Will we get all of the secrets? Will George R. R. Martin hold anything back? Personally, I think we'll get a lot, but not everything. So George R. R. Martin has previously said about the tourney at Harrenhal that he could have written an entire book about what happened at the tourney at Harrenhal, and a George R. R. Martin book at that. So a big book. There's a lot going on. Now, I don't think he will be able to tell, and it's to be clear, he wasn't the the guy who wrote the script, but he was heavily involved in this. So what we see here is not going to be contrary to his world in the books. I don't think they can tell the story of the tourney at Harrenhal without revealing at least some of the things that we need it to tell us. Some of them are just confirmations of stuff that we kind of figured out already. So, for example, I'm fully expecting that it will become very, very clear that the tourney at Harrenhal was set up by Team Rhaegar as a kind of pseudo Great Council to show Rhaegar is amazing, to get people together to say, well, maybe we should do some kind of a soft coup against this Mad King. I expect that will be confirmed. I expect we also will get confirmed a few of the love matches here. I think R plus L equals J will get a huge boost, in as much as we may not see John. In fact, we shouldn't see John because he doesn't appear until uh, the Tower of Joy. But I think we will see the start of the romance between Rhaegar and Lyanna. I think we will also see and answer a whole load of questions. What's going on with the Shara Dane? Um, I'm really holding out, fingers crossed on that one. I think we will probably have some questions left over after all of this, though. The way that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms did this, which was probably the season so far in the Game of Thrones universe. Are we saying that now? I don't know. That is closest to George R. R. Martin, in as much as this was the first time that a showrunner came out and said, I just want to make George R. R. Martin pleased. You know, if he's not happy with something, I'm not going to include it. So what happened there was that George R. R. Martin twice, we're told, maybe more, but twice that we're told, requested that things remain a little bit vague. those two things, in case you're wondering, was Dunk actually knighted? And did Egg have permission to go off with Dunk? Now, if you watch the show, you probably have quite strong thoughts on what the truth of both of those things is, based on what we saw in the show. But George R. R. Martin wanted both to remain not 100%. I suspect that is what is going to happen with this stage play. There will be some things that are very heavily hinted, and there will be some things that are explicit, that are very clear. The things that are very heavily hinted will be things that, or some of them will be things that he wants to reveal himself in the books at some later point. So the thing I would look out for is at some point, perhaps alongside the stage play actually happening, maybe a little bit later, we get the official script. Because theatre lovers will know that actors clearly do stick to the script, but sometimes there's slight tweaks. What we should have from an official script is not just the words, but also some kind of stage direction. What's going on, what the context and nuance is here. Now, in that, I think we will probably see some of what George R. R. Martin wants us to know and not necessarily completely know. So hopefully we will get that. I'm pretty sure we will. And what will emerge is a much stronger understanding of what happened in the build-up to Robert's Rebellion. I don't think he's going to spill the beans on absolutely everything, but I think we will get a lot of clarity on a lot of things that we thought we knew but didn't have full proof on. So just random example, what's going on with Sir Barristan? Sir Barristan is going to appear there, and he says a few very vague things to Daenerys about that period of time. I think we will get clarity on quite a few of those very vague things that he said. Okay, let's go to a couple of questions from the chat. The Rune Reader saying, "Good evening, Robert. I hope you're well. Thank you for all you do. Do you have a favourite sigil of a house?" Oh, interesting question. A favourite sigil? I don't think I've got a favourite immediately. I've always liked House Umbar with the giant breaking the chains. That kind of works for me. House Darklin with the we'll change this every time we get an extra person on the Kingsguard. We'll just add to all of the grandiosity of our sigil. That also kind of works for me. But I do like the simplicity of some of the kind of the OG houses, like the Stark Direwolf. They're not messing around with all of the other fancy stuff. It's just Direwolf. You know who we are. And similarly, the Lannister Lion. The ones that are most striking are not the ones that are very twiddly, have extra layers and things like that. It's the ones that are you don't need any explanation. You know who we are. Tony Sled, it feels like George R. R. Martin wants to write original scripts for Duncan Egg adventuring to give more contours to their story. House of the Dragon didn't have room. He wants to give original scripts for Duncan Egg adventuring to give more contours to their story. Yes, I think so. George R. R. Martin loves Duncan Egg. At the moment, he enjoys writing that and enjoys the world that he's created there, probably even more than his main The Song of Ice and Fire story, it has to be said. That's the thing that he seems to talk about with the most pride. So, yes, that adds extra context to them, but I think from his writer's perspective, we're really just seeing, here's some characters I love. Let's put them in new situations. So we've got the 3 stories that are written, but he's talked about, and in fact, Ira Parker, the showrunner for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, says he's had 12 outlines from George. George R. R. Martin knows what he's going to do with this story, but most importantly, where he wants to play with those characters, where he wants to show those characters for who they are. And I think the kind of nuance I would add to this is that we have only had Duncan and Egg in a very short period of their time together. We've had Duncan and Egg while Dunk is still relatively young, Egg is still very young, and before the world knows who Egg is. Egg is hiding for most of this, pretending not to be a Targaryen. The end of the Mystery Night is often overlooked. At the end of the Mystery Night, we get this kind of like meta message that this is where a dragon did hatch there, Egg. He became a Targaryen. The implication is from that moment on, he's no longer able to hide. People now know that, this bald little kid wandering around with this really tall guy, that's a Targaryen. He can't pretend anymore. So we've just had that short period of time. Our next period of time is when they're still doing the Duncan Egg Hedge Knight thing, but people kind of know, some people at least know who Egg is. That's going to be a big narrative shift. Then we get this time when it's like, actually no longer are we talking about Egg as being like some random, very far from the throne kind of guy, but his dad's the king. And suddenly, he's there having to deal with serious matters. Then we get times when he is the king, when Dunk is in the Kingsguard. And each time the responsibility will go up a notch. And that will affect how those characters interact with the world around them. Because the way that Dunk and Egg interact with people in the first 3 stories is not going to be the way they interact with people later. There will still be that simplicity about both characters. I'm absolutely sure of that. But still, the way that other people view them will have changed. Akeem Wade, who do you think the Tattered Prince really is, and why does he want Pentos? I think the Tattered Prince is exactly who he says he is. So in Pentos, they have this really weird, from our perspective, I would say, way of selecting what we would probably call a head of state. So the head of state isn't the person with great executive power. The head of state, and this probably is slightly easier to understand from more European mindset than American mindset, where the head of government and head of state feel quite close together. From a more European perspective, you have your prime minister and then you have your president or king or whatever. You have the person who's actually running the country, and then you have the figurehead. And what we've got here with the Tattered Prince is, in Pentos, they have their head of state, their figurehead, who they decide on. And then as long as he is there, he is treated like the most amazing person ever. He has, people sort of proverbially feeding him grapes while fanning him with all of the palm leaves and, everything you would expect, until they decide, oh, he brought us bad luck. We lost a war. The harvest failed. At that point, they just execute that prince and bring in a new one. The Tattered Prince says, that what happened was that he was a person who was supposed to be that head of state and decided, yeah, it's not really worth it. 2 or 3 years of indulgence and then nothing? No. He ran away. And he ran away and then founded a sellsword company, and that is what's going on. But he thinks in himself that he should be ruling Pentos. So what we've got going on is this sellsword company who wants to be ruling Pentos, or the Tattered Prince wants to be ruling Pentos, but doesn't really have the power to do that. But maybe if they negotiate with someone like Barristan, that they can get Danny, who has dragons, who does have the power to overturn Pentos. And if they can create some kind of promise there, if we side with you, you will give us Pentos, then it would all work out and the Tattered Prince might be able to rule. So I think his backstory is as we think it is. And why he wants Pentos is why he says he wants Pentos. Sometimes the most straightforward answer is actually the real answer. Let's go to a question from Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi Robert, I recently reread the first two Bran chapters in A Dance with Dragons, and there were, as always, some details I hadn't noticed before. First, the Night's Watchman who Cold Hands goes back to kill, and Summer ends up feeding on. Who were they? Did Cold Hands kill them, or were they already dead?" Okay, so in case you missed it or can't remember, in A Dance with Dragons, Bran is heading up to Bloodraven's cave. He's accompanied by Cold Hands. Cold Hands has basically been sent there by Bloodraven to escort Bran and co up north. Now, at one point, Cold Hands goes, "There's some enemies nearby. You carry on, I'll deal with them." And he heads off. And he comes back. "Oh, I've got you some meat. All is good. I know you were a bit cold and a bit hungry, but I've dealt with the enemies, and here's some food." There are lots of layers of what meat was that to this, but it turns out from Bran walking into Summer and going to investigate that these enemies were Night's Watchmen, 5 of them. And we have one big clue, is that one of them had one hand and the other was bound up in leather. That is, I think, a pretty clear clue that that was Otto Lophand, because they were all members of the Night's Watch. They were dressed in black. Otto Lophand is the person who killed Jeor Mormont. So, what seems the iteration of events seems to be there was the revolt, the mutiny at Craster's Keep. The bad Night's Watchmen, they attacked Jeor Mormont and the loyal Night's Watchmen, and basically Jeor Mormont was killed. Sam manages to escape. Sam makes it down to the wall, escorted by Cold Hands. Cold Hands escorts Bran back north again, but as they were heading north, he realizes there's some of those mutineers nearby. Are they actually tracking Bran? It's never made clear. But Cold Hands, who is, he's not just like a rando undead person on an elk. Don't know how rando that is. Probably quite random. But he also seems to be getting intelligence from the crows. So the crows, the ravens around him just like come to him. They seem to be talking to him. He seems to be able to communicate with them. Bran notes this just before this bit happens. He notes, oh, he can talk to these guys. They're telling him stuff. So what seems to happen is that the mutiny happens. Cold Hands goes down to the wall, back up again. This time he's got Bran, and he finds out through the crows that some of those mutineers, 5 of them, are close by. He then tells Bran, keep going. I'll catch up with you. He goes out. He seems to kill them, as far as we can tell, probably with the help of some other animals. Summer, who Bran is walking into, comes and discovers them later, and then Cold Hands returns. So that's the kind of the iteration of events. Part of this is a kind of a hint about Cold Hands being a serious member of the Night's Watch. He actually cares about this. The chances of those guys actually discovering Bran and tracking him seem quite limited. Probably this was Cold Hands going, no, these were bad guys, and I'm going to deal with them. These are traitors to the Night's Watch. Cold Hands remembers his vows, and he knows that those guys broke their vows, and they endangered the entire mission. Question from Amelia Scales. Do you think Dexter's leak that Dunk survived Summerhall is true or a miscommunication? Feels like a weird way for George R. R. Martin to announce that. Okay, so this is the... I talked about this a week or 2 ago. Very happy to again. So Dexter Sol Ansel, who plays Egg in the TV show, he was on... I still don't know the exact context here because it's a little bit weird. He and Peter Claffey, who plays Dunk, they were on what looks like an Irish TV, I'm going to say daytime TV show. They were making sock puppets. I don't know all the feel though was that this wasn't a hard-hitting interview. This was just like a few softball questions thrown out there, and the host said something like, "Oh, so did George R. R. Martin talk to you about your characters?" Kind of standard question. And they're chatting away, and then Dexter says something like, yeah, so we know what happens to them, and we know about Summerhall, and we know that Dunk survives. At which point Peter Claffey seems to oh, hang on, no, stop, let's move on, talk about something else, as if he realizes that that's a spoiler, but Dexter, bless him, probably doesn't. Was this George R. R. Martin leaking something out through them? No. There are only 2 options here. Option number 1 is that this was exactly what it seemed to be, which was a kid who's there in front of the media gaze for one of the first times. It was asked a question, answered it honestly, and it contained a spoiler. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is that they are playing the best possible game of trolling the fandom ever, the 2 of them, because there were 3 of these within the space of 2 or 3 days. There were 3 of these sort of spoiler-ish comments coming out. I tend to the first explanation. I tend to the idea that this is just George R. R. Martin said a few things to them just to explain the characters, and Dexter just said it out loud, and he probably shouldn't have done, but he's a kid, so I hope he doesn't beat himself up around it. I genuinely do. I think the fandom loved it. I thought it was great, and I think sometimes, particularly when you get this kind of published material that we've got and an adaptation, this whole actors staying stumm, not wishing to give the game away. Sometimes we like it when they do. So, yeah. Did was this George R. R. Martin trying to announce something? No, I don't think he was intending that at all. Was it an intentional leak? No, I don't personally think so. I think it was just Dexter saying stuff he probably shouldn't have done. And Amelia Scales saying, love to the mods, friendliest space on YouTube. Well, yeah, let's do some love to the moderators. If you are watching this live on YouTube, if you're in the chat space right now, just show a little bit of love to the moderators. They are amazing. The reason why this is one of the best and most supportive places you will find on YouTube, and I say that not to, bang my own drum, is because the credit belongs to the moderators. That I've always said that what I want is for this to be a place where people can express their thoughts and feelings freely, but we're not having any abuse. We're not having anyone being shamed for their views. We're also not having any real world politics here. This is just about us talking about the things we love, and the moderators are keeping that true. So, hat tip to them. Thank you very much. Let's go to a question from Ryan's Orcas. Hi, Robert. Hope you are well. There are many blood sacrifices in A Song of Ice and Fire. Do you think there will be a blood sacrifice in the end of these books? If so, who would you think would be the sacrifice? A really interesting question, because yes, there are a lot of blood sacrifices, and this seems to be one of the two big things about most bits of magic here in this world, is the need for sacrifice. Intentionality is the other. There are some sorts of magic that just sort of seem to unconsciously happen. Dragon dreams and green dreams, they're in that category. But if you're trying to do a thing, then you need the intentionality and you need some kind of sacrifice. Something has to be given up for it. Now, will there be a big sacrifice at the end of this? Well, yeah. I wish I could say no, but I don't think we can be sure of that. There are two bits here I would probably highlight. The first is this ongoing idea that I vocalized before season 8 of Game of Thrones, and then it happened in season 8 of Game of Thrones, was John killing Dany, that wasn't intended as a sacrifice, but it certainly looks a bit like one. And then the second thought is that we almost forget about it, but the big thing that has to be rectified in this series is the seasons being out of balance. To the extent that when the very first book came out, and you get the blurb on the back of the very first book, which George R. R. Martin will have cleared, in fact, probably wrote, it said, many years ago, a preternatural event set the seasons out of balance. And then it goes on to the rest. That is the foundational statement of everything is wrong and we have to get things right again. So something has to happen in order to get the seasons back right again. I 100% believe that we need to reach a point at the end of this series of books that allows the seasons to go back to normal. They're not just naturally like that. They have to be returned. Now, we could digress a lot into exactly what it was that was the preternatural event, the magical event that made the seasons go out of kilter. But in order to undo that, one suspects you need some kind of big magic, which everything we know tells us that there must be some kind of big sacrifice. So I think I'm kind of working around this idea that, yeah, there has to be some kind of big sacrifice. In the short term, I think we definitely see this with Euron. He's definitely trying to do a sacrifice to do big things. We can see that the sea battle, he's strapped priests, magic users, the mother of his unborn child, who is, king's blood. He is a king. He's sacrificing them in order to perform some great magic. But I had a dark thought. I don't want to follow too far down. That everything that happens in A Song of Ice and Fire is kind of death and destruction-y. This is grimdark. There are lots of deaths. We also think that a lot of the events in this world are manipulated by Bloodraven, Weirwood Network, whatever you want to call it. Are those the sacrifices for the magic that's needed in order to put things right again, get rid of the others, put the seasons back in balance? As I say, it's a dark thought. I don't want to go down that route too much yet, but feel free to run with that. Let's go to a question from Catherine Fursith. When they reach the hill with Bloodraven's cave, they ask Cold Hands if there is another entrance. This is Bran and Cade. And he says there is one. 3 leagues, that's 9 miles, 16.5 kilometers north, down a sinkhole. Do you think we'll see this at some point, perhaps in Bran's escape? Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Why was that dropped in there? Because I think we want at the back of our head, I think George R. Martin wants us to have in the back of our heads the idea that there is another way out of this. Whether because we know, and we don't know all of the context, but the Hodor moment will happen. Clearly, the others are there at the gates trying to break in. Something's going to happen. Bran is going to have to escape pretty quickly. Presumably, Mira is going to be helping him out. Everyone knows about that main entrance. That's where, if you remember, when Bran and co were arriving, the main entrance to Bloodraven's cave was in plain sight. And outside of it were a whole load of wights. They were covered in snow, but there are a whole load of wights there just waiting for somebody to walk across that field to go to the entrance. If there's another entrance that no one knows about, that seems to be the best way that you could escape this. The idea that it's north is actually quite intriguing, because it's like, that's not the way I would want to escape. I would want to escape south. But yes, I think it's pretty likely that they have to escape in a rush. And if they have to escape in a rush, I think it's very likely that it's not through that main entrance exit. It's through another way. The only other way we know at the moment is that sinkhole. John Greenwood, you're the best, Robert. Oh, thank you very much. Is it ever said why the Targaryen sigil has a red dragon? One would think with Balerion they'd go black dragon. Good question. So I think it's not about a particular dragon. So the sigil, we should probably be clear, was something that the Targaryens invented at the time of the invasion. Back in the time of Valyria, sigils weren't really a thing. House names, house words, they weren't really a thing. That was a Westeros thing. This was one of the attempts by Aegon, and a successful attempt, I think, to integrate the Targaryens with Westerosi culture. Not 100%. They wanted to be different, be better, but they wanted to fit in with Westerosi culture. And one of the ways they did that was by having a sigil. And that was where the dragon comes in. Now, would they just pick Balerion? Well, there were three of them, three different colored dragons, so they weren't going to go with that. So what were their house words? What were the things that they were thinking? Fire, blood. What color are fire and blood? Red. I think it's as simple as that. This was just a matter of showing a dragon which is a composite dragon that kind of represented the Targaryens. Red seems right. Buttoned Up Reader, was Summerhall an unintended sacrifice that led to the birth of the prince that was promised? Well, that was certainly what Maester Aemon thought. It has to be said. So his idea was that, and he's got in front of him all of the different texts about the prince that was promised, and he thought, okay, so we need smoke and salt, and that seems to be what we've got here at Summerhall. We clearly have the smoke, the salt from the tears, people crying, and he thought, okay, we have a dragon being born. Rhaegar was born at Summerhall. So his thought probably was there were unintended sacrifices that hatched a dragon. Now, what did he think the unintended sacrifices were? Well, we always thought that there were three significant deaths. There was Aegon, who was the king. There was his firstborn son, Duncan the Small, who he could have been king. So you could argue he's got king's blood. And then Dunk himself, who wasn't king's blood at all himself, but an heir to the throne, sacrificed himself for Dunk. And so if you take the kind of step of logic, he does have the kind of the king's blood stamp on him. We've, as per the previous question, kind of come to this idea that maybe Dunk survived, so maybe there weren't three of those sacrificial deaths, but maybe there were others we don't know about. As far as I'm concerned, was Rhaegar the prince that was promised? I think it was pretty clear he wasn't, because he died without doing, without confronting the others. And he grew up to decide it wasn't him. It was actually, first of all, he thought it was his son, Aegon, who was the prince that was promised. So, no, I don't think that the unintended sacrifices led to the birth of the prince that was promised, at least not there. You could argue that Rhaegar's son, Jon, has a lot of the prince that was promised imagery to him, and I suspect that's where Bloodraven went. Michael Trainer, you mentioned the term grimdark, which I know has its origin in Warhammer 40,000. Are you a fan? If so, what's your faction of choice? Yeah, so grimdark is, I mean, I don't know where the exact origin of this is, but the idea is that this is a fantasy or sci-fi world that it is unrelentingly bleak. Unlike Tolkien, where one of the central things in Tolkien is hope, goodness, love will out. That's not how we have George R. R. Martin. Within the fantasy oeuvre, I would suggest that grimdark, one of the godfathers of grimdark certainly is George R. R. Martin. because A Song of Ice and Fire is not here saying, here's this great hero who's going to win against everything. Here's this perfect human. Here's this wonderful civilization. Here's whatever good thing. Everybody is a shade of grey. As for Warhammer 40k, yeah, uh, I mean, I've got sort of an hot and cold relationship with Warhammer 40k. I have to say, I was into it when I was much younger, back in the good old days. If the words rogue trader mean anything to you, then that's my kind of era. I was there before yeah, we had the huge amount of other, you know, the multiplication of factions. Let's put it that way. I was there for the first Harlequins. I was there for when the squats were a thing. Um, then I kind of went quiet. I'm sort of slowly getting back into it now. It has to be said. Um, but yeah, as I say, it's a complicated relationship. I am a I count myself a Warhammer 40k fan, but it feels like I've got a couple of decades worth of lore to catch up on. Let's go to Hranabe Mitra saying hello, Robert, or salutations, Robert and Dan the dog. I hope you're well, enjoying the start of the spring. I am. Yeah, it did feel quite spring-like the last couple of days. Um, no question from me. Just wanted to send the love to the mods, to the chat, and my fellow patrons. All of us who go to Stratford upon Avon this summer should wear your Blood Raven t-shirt to the event. I will definitely be wearing my When in Doubt, Blame Blood Raven t-shirt. Um, and I will be intrigued to see how many people get it. William Schneider. Hello, Robert. I think the only scene in the Seven Kingdoms show that was not from Dunk's point of view was of Egg in his brother's room standing over him with a knife. Do you think that was added to the show? Or was added to show how close to madness Egg is and to help show why he needed to go with Dunk even more than his father realized? Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 points here. First of all, I really liked the fact that they did mostly focus on Dunk's POV because the book is from Dunk's POV. All three stories are from Dunk's POV. And they kind of stuck to that. There were two or three bits that weren't from his POV. There was one, I think, at the beginning of episode 3, when you get Egg sort of waking up before Dunk and sort of going out and trying to teach Thunder how to, uh, you know, run, and he meets Robin Reisling. You remember the scene. So there were a couple of other times when it wasn't just from Dunk's perspective. I do have to say at this point, he didn't, I think, get the laurels he deserved. Peter Claffey. This show would have not worked if he had not been so good at being Dunk. There were other scene stealers around. Lionel Baratheon was a scene stealer, etc., etc. But Peter Claffey did such a good job because we saw almost all of it through his eyes. And if he hadn't been quite so good, then the whole show would have fallen down. So a moment just to tip the hat there to Peter Claffey. But the sort of the bigger question you're saying, um, what was the point of that scene? I think you're right, but I want to take a little step back and just paint the context for all of that, because in the novella it was a little bit more straightforward, but the show nuanced this a little bit. That you get Egg off camera says to his dad, I want to be a squire, but the only person I want to be a squire to is Dunk. And so Makar summons Dunk and says, okay, we can make this work. You can come to Summer Hall. He can be your squire. I can tell you're not really that well trained. I will get my guys to train you, and we can make this all work out. And Dunk says, "You know what? I've had enough of princes," and he sort of heads off. And for a while, you think that's it. There's a good chunk of time he's meeting various people. It feels like he's just had enough. And then it's not played up a lot, but I think the pivotal conversation was between him and Darren, and they're at Beesbury's funeral, which was epic. And Dunk goes over and he says, "I can't believe you're even here." And Darren, in his way, always seems to know the right thing to be saying. He says, Aerion wasn't always like that. When he was younger, he was actually all right. When he was younger, he used to enjoy fishing. And then it kind of cuts off. They don't make the point then. They don't show Dunk responding to this. But I think we should take the clear implication that Dunk's going, "I don't want Egg to turn out like Aerion." And Darren has basically said to him, "Aerion wasn't like that. Something happened. If only he'd had a better influence in his life." So we then get the jump cut, if you watch it, straight to a fish on Egg's table. And it kind of reminds us that when we first see Egg in Dunk's camp, Dunk has ridden off, he's gone to the tourney and he's set himself up as a little camp somewhere. He goes off to sort of explore. He comes back and Egg is there. And Egg has looked after the camp, uninvited. He's looked after the camp and he's caught some fish. The clear implication is that Egg also liked fishing. He also says a little, he actually says it at one point, "I like fishing." And we get the direct link. So did Aerion. And then we get the jump cut over to a fish. They wanted us to think that Egg is like Aerion used to be. That Aerion, for whatever reason, had the wrong influences. He went the wrong way. And Dunk kind of realizes that. That's the moment at which we get Egg going over thinking, what do I do? And we should be getting this echo of he talks about how Aerion used to come into his room with a knife, and that's exactly what he's now doing to Aerion. He's walking into Aerion's room with a knife. Is he about to turn the same way that Aerion did? Makar stops that, and then Dunk appears and double stops that. And when we get Dunk and Egg together riding away, we get that little scene where Dunk's talking about the Seven Kingdoms and Egg goes, "No, it's the Nine Kingdoms. I'm not going to go down that route unless you want me to." But Dunk says, "Are you mad?" And for a moment, we're supposed to go, is that what he's concerned about? Is that it? He's worried that Egg would turn out like Aerion. And he's actually self-sacrificially taking it on himself to be taking Egg away from all of that and trying to show him, to teach him a better life. So I think that was what was going on, and that was why they showed us that scene with Egg. That was why they showed the fish. That was why they showed what Darren said. We're supposed to be wondering here. When you add all of that to obviously what happened with the fortune teller earlier, we're supposed to be wondering, is Egg gonna turn bad? Dunk is perhaps the person to try and save him. Clobopus used beat saying, "Hi Robert, finished the Lord of the Rings trilogy today." Oh, fantastic. I'm so happy for you. I've watched your videos for years. They add a lot of extra depth, so thank you. I've also watched Bakshi's adaptation and was wondering your opinion, if any. So this is Ralph Bakshi. For those who've not watched this, then back in, I'm gonna say the 70s, might be the early 80s, I don't know. We had this um, adaptation of the Lord of the Rings before we got before Peter Jackson had even been thought of. We had this adaptation of the Lord of the Rings, or at least the first part of the Lord of the Rings, which was animated, but also, and I don't know the technical term for it, some of this was human actors, but then turned into animations. What are my thoughts about? My thoughts are I've not seen it for 20 years, so my thoughts are rather vague. My memories were as a much younger person. Oh, well, that was kind of fun, um, but a little bit frustrating because it wasn't everything I wanted it to be. My general view on adaptations of The Lord of the Rings is if they bring people into this world, I'm happy. And I think that did. I think that brought a lot of people into this world. I think it brought a lot of new fans to The Lord of the Rings. I think it played a vital role in actually paving the way for the Peter Jackson films because people saw the potential without thinking this is the definitive version. And that I think was really important because it had a devoted fan base for a number of years. As I say, I've not seen it for a very long time, but I have kind of fond memories of it. Yeah, I think that's probably as far as I can go with that one. SDH, with Bran a cripple, might his successor as king be a future son of Tyrion and Sansa if they truly marry, mimicking House Tudor in English history? Well, it is taking us a long way into the future. So if we, I've got a question about Bran as king coming up, but let's say we accept Bran becomes king. Let's say we accept this idea that he can't have children. And let's also say we accept the fact that he dies a natural-ish death, which isn't 100% given what happened with Bloodraven, who hooked himself up to the Weirwood network and carried on living. So if we accept all of those things, we say, okay, well, who would succeed him? I think the prior question is what is the mechanism that the Seven Kingdoms will have for deciding on their next ruler? Is it just going to be, let's have a great council? If so, I think given Bran is still, he's going to be very young still, 6, I think, at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. So by the end of it, 10, something along those lines, he's not going to be very old. You could imagine him very easily living for more than half a century more. What is going to be the political situation then? Nothing could have changed. So I don't think that we can at this point say who's the most obvious person from a great council to be succeeding. Tyrion and Sansa were married, but the clear implication is that Littlefinger is going to get an annulment to that and then try to remarry Sansa. I think it is very likely that if Sansa does get up, and we recently had a bit of a like an unexpected law drop from George R. Martin when he said, "Yeah, I was planning on killing off Sansa, but maybe now no." If she does survive in the North, given her history, is she going to want to marry? It's not at all clear. She may even become this kind of Queen Elizabeth I kind of figure. So, yeah, I don't think that we're necessarily going to be going with the House Tudor. I mean, I get the House Tudor thing. For those who don't know what we're talking about here, um, Wars of the Roses, very high level. Historians forgive me, but we have House York against House Lancaster, and then eventually the whole thing ends with, well, let's get a marriage between the two of them, and then their children can reign, which seems the most sensible thing. The story began in A Song of Ice and Fire with the Starks against the Lannisters, and it doesn't take too much interpretation to see Lannister, Lancaster, Stark, York. It kind of works. And so this idea of where are you going to get a Lannister Stark marriage from Tyrion and Sansa does kind of make sense. I think no, but I like the idea. Let's go to where are we at? Madeline Tyrell. Sorry, Madeline Tyrell Dane. Hello, Robert. I hope you're well. I'm very interested in Darren the Dreamer. What do you think about how he was portrayed in the show? Do you think we will learn anything more about him in future stories? And is there any significance to his mother being a Dane? Well, how was he portrayed? We didn't actually see much of him. We had 3 significant scenes with him, I think. Maybe 4. How was he portrayed? I think pretty much as I expected and hoped, in all honesty. He should be a character that you feel a bit of sympathy for. Someone that you look at and go, yeah, you didn't want this. He gets the reason why he's a drunkard is because he gets these dragon dreams all the time. And this is his way of self-medicating, that he can try to stop the dreams by just drinking lots. And he doesn't want to be a great knight, but his father is pushing him to it because he's the eldest son. And so when he's forced into this, he's just going to go, okay, well, I'll pretend to fight and then I'll just fall off my horse. You kind of feel sorry for him in a way because he's pushed into things that he doesn't want. He never seems to be really happy with himself. And I think they showed that in the few times that we saw him. What I did like was that he seemed to proactively want to share the knowledge that he'd got. He he hates these visions that he gets. He hates the dreams he gets. And yet here he is very open to telling people about what he knows. So I liked that. I think that he will appear again, but not in the next 2 stories. There's no real reason for him to be reappearing in the next 2 stories. He should be quite a significant part in the story going forward when Egg is older. When Egg is now sort of centered back in on King's Landing, Summerhall, Dragonstone, for a reasonable period of time, we don't know exactly how long, perhaps 10 years, then he is the heir to the throne on Dragonstone with his personal Maester Aemon, which you're pretty certain he will have visited. So yeah, he will make a return, but probably not for the next 2 or 3 series. Michael Trainer, do you think there was a 3-eyed crow or magic tree seer person at the end of the world before Bloodraven? Can you speculate on this a little bit? At the end of the world before Bloodraven. So, I mean, I don't know if this is the answer you're wanting, but the 3-eyed crow is not a job title. The 3-eyed crow is a description of an avatar. It's probably our best way of putting it. So when Bran is talking about the three-eyed crow, it's because in his green dreams he saw a crow with three eyes. And so he thinks of somebody as being this three-eyed crow. Then in green dreams, we should probably say how you come across. You do not know yourself how you appear to the rest of the world. Bran seems to have appeared, at least to start with, as a wolf with wings tied down by chains. That is what Jojen saw in his green dreams, and that is what he went up to Winterfell to look for. Not, I'm going to try and find Bran. He was going to look for the wolf with wings who was tied down by chains. How does he look for that? Well, if that's Bran's avatar, a reflection of who he truly is, it's because a wolf, Stark, that bit's pretty obvious. The wings, they can fly, they're magical. And tied down by chains is actually being held in place. Also, perhaps the idea that Summer was being held down at the time. So your avatar, you do not know what your avatar looks like. You do not know how you appear to other people. And so the Three-Eyed Crow is not a job title, it is just how Bran saw the avatar of Bloodraven. And the evidence we have for this is that when they get up to Bloodraven's cave and Bran says, "Are you the Three-Eyed Crow?" then Bloodraven, who obviously understands how these things work, but still doesn't know how he appears, goes, "Three-Eyed Crow? Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense." So Three-Eyed Crow is not the job title, it's merely Bloodraven's avatar that from Bran's perspective. Before him, Bloodraven, who is described as the last Green Seer, there were other Green Seers. When Bran, via Hodor, explores this cave system, he finds a lot of children of the forest, several of them, hooked up to the Weirwood network with roots and the like, sort of intermingling with them in the same way they do with Bloodraven, but even more so. And I think the clear implication is that these were Green Seers who were there before, and they're slowly being subsumed within the network. Bloodraven is also slowly being subsumed within the network, but he's not as far gone as the others. He's there, still able to talk in the first person. So, was there a Three-Eyed Crow or Magic Tree Seer person before Bloodraven? Yes, there were lots. It's just that the last one, because the amount of Children of the Forest has been decimated so much, now the last Green Seer from their perspective is actually not one of theirs, but it's Bloodraven. Amelia Scales, do you think Aemond and Alice will be romantic in House of the Dragon like in the book? I can't see him being thrilled by a Weirwood acid trip. Okay, so this is House of the Dragon / Fire and Blood question. In the book, and we should always say when we're talking about in the book, we're not talking about here's stone cold facts when we're talking about the book. This is a history book based on reports in world of various people. And so we're reading interpretations of what might have happened rather than a sort of objective God level assessment of what was actually going on. But the way that we're told the story is that Aemond and Alice Rivers kind of got together, became lovers. Is that going to happen on a TV show? I think probably yes. I mean, they've certainly played into this idea that Aemond likes the older woman. We certainly saw that in season two. So yes, I think so. When he lands, so basically what's happened, high level, what happened in the story in the book was that Damon and all of his army, they head off. And Aemond and Kristen Cole arrive at Harrenhal. It's like, well, where did they go? And Aemond gets a bit angry. While they're all gone, King's Landing falls. So, okay, this is now their new base. And so Aemond bases himself at Harrenhal. And while he's there, then he gets rid of House Strong. So Simon loved you while you lasted. But he gets rid of House Strong. And Alice Rivers survives and they become lovers. So that's the idea. Is something similar to that going to happen? Yeah, I think so, probably. Is that Alice Rivers was there talking to the new guy when Damon was there, but Damon wasn't having it. Damon loved somebody else. He wasn't having any of it. So when Aemond arrives, yeah, why not? Let's go to Sir Friend. It'll be Thursday, Robert. I've been thinking about how Lady Stoneheart's story might come to a satisfying conclusion. Personally, I'd love it if she could somehow be around to not only discover her children are alive, but also that John was never a bastard. The scene they added for the show where Kat confessed to Jane, to Lisa, something like regret at her mistreatment of John was fantastic. However, I don't think we'll get anything quite so happy, if that's the right word. What do you think of Arya giving her the gift of mercy and setting her vengeful spirit free, so to speak? It's part of her training that all men must die. Best wishes, warmest regards, and to you. So, Lady Stoneheart. Lady Stoneheart was brought back from the dead with a small core of previous thoughts and feelings, the things that bound her to this world, the most passionate thoughts and feelings she had at her death, she clung on to as Lady Stoneheart. And that, in practice, probably means that the thing that drives her now is revenge on the Fraser Lannisters, and also to find her remaining children. She thinks that Arya and Sansa are alive. She thinks that Bran and Rickon are dead. So, what will, and that drive is what is keeping her tied to this mortal coil, is my take on the situation. And the same kind of thing was true for Beric Dondarrion, is that what tied him to this world was the commission that he'd been given before he set off from King's Landing. So, what therefore would be a satisfying ending for Lady Stoneheart? She needs a couple of things. First of all, vengeance must happen to the Freys and the Starks. And then secondly, she has to reach some kind of satisfaction as regards to her children. So the vengeance against the Freys and the Starks, I think, will happen in the Winds of Winter. I think the Red Wedding 2.0, I've been threatening a video on this one for a while. I think it will happen. As for her children, I think eventually she will find out that Rickon and Bran didn't die. And I think she will eventually find out that Sansa and Arya are also both alive. At that point, her spirit can probably be at rest. How we get there, though, is an entirely different matter. What would be a satisfying end for her? Yeah, I get Sir Arya giving her the gift of death does kind of make sense once she has reached peace. the idea that she's going to express regret about how she treated John, that would require John's true identity, I think, John's true identity to be revealed, and not just revealed to him and a couple of people up in the north, but the wider world knows about it. That is going to be something deep into A Dream of Spring, I suspect. So I don't think so, personally, but perhaps. Let's go to a question from Kate. While reading Duncan Egg, Book 3, the treatment of homosexuality seems a little dated, with both the murderous, jilted lover, Alan Cockshaw, and the unrestrained urges of John the Fiddler, and his effeminate behaviour when revealed as Damon II. How do you think the show will handle this in Season 3? Also, how does the portrayal of Lionel the Laughing Storm in Season 1 impact on this whole storyline? Right, so, in case you missed it, yes, Season 3 does seem to have, I'm going to say it's a subtext underlying, as in when I first read the story, I kind of picked up on it, but I have to admit I've not read through, because it is quite important to the denouement of the story, as I'll explain in just one moment. But I've not read it through with that as the sort of critical lens, which perhaps will give me more insights. But for those who kind of missed it, in book 3, basically we have attorney. Spoilers, I should probably say. The rule here is that book spoilers are fine, but the books have been around for ages. Show spoilers are not fine if we know stuff that is going to be in the show. We can talk about what happened in the book. As far as the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is concerned, they do seem to be pretty strongly following the book. But we have this guy called Alan Cockshaw, which is, again, quite the name from George R. R. Martin. He appears to have had, and again, it depends on how you interpret this, some kind of obsession with Damon II Blackfire before his exile. And then when he returned under the cover of John the Fiddler, then Alan becomes obsessed again in some way. But then you get Damon, who kind of gets focused in on Dunk. Now, this makes Alan jealous, and he tries to kill Dunk. And first of all, he tries to bribe somebody to kill him in the lists, in the jousting. Then he kind of tries to tempt him off to just outside a well, where he was going to push him into the well and kill him. He doesn't end well. He ends up in the well and is kind of left there. So he doesn't come off well in this. The plain text reading is that he is somebody who is obsessed with Damon II, and as far as we can tell, this was unrequited. And jealous, and tries to kill whoever he thinks is a sort of a challenge to him and to Damon. So it's an important part of this story, because Dunk is thinking, so this is the guy who's been trying to kill me all this time, and is kind of disappointed and doesn't really understand why or what's going on. It's Egg who kind of figures out most of this. Dunk, true to form, kind of blunders all the way through this story, not really understanding what's happening. He talks to this John the Fiddler guy, doesn't really know what's going on there. But as I said, how John the Fiddler, Damon II, is portrayed, as I say, it's not at all clear that he requited. In fact, he probably did not requite Alan's feelings. What drew him to Dunk? That's again, a little harder to say, and I will be fascinated to see how they cover this in the show, because he does seem to be focused in on him very clearly, and he gets visions of him. Damon the Second Blackfire, John the Fiddler gets these dragon dreams, and they're really quite vivid when it comes to Dunk. And I've talked about this with Dunk quite a few times, is that he's not a magical person, and yet he's, for those who are fans of the Wheel of Time, he comes across as Taviran. He's the kind of person who's kind of like walking through history, and everything is swirling around him. Events shift and shake wherever he goes, without him really doing stuff, but just by him being him. He's there at the tourney at Ashford Meadow, and like the heir to the throne dies for him. He takes Egg down to Dawn just at the right time to avoid the great spring sickness. He says, "Oh, there's a tourney over here. Let's go and have a look at this." And it turns out that's not actually a tourney. That's actually the second Blackfire Rebellion being plotted. He's just kind of blundering into things one after another. Um, so you can imagine why Damon the Second Blackfire would be fascinated by him. He sees him dressed in white. He sees a future member of the Kingsguard. So, um, how are they going to adapt this? I don't know. In all honesty, I think the focus will have to be on Damon the Second Blackfire, who should. And whenever I've read the story, I just view him as this kind of figure to feel a little sorry for, in the same way we do with Damon the Drunken. He seems to be afflicted by all of these dreams, and uh, he's obviously wanting to talk to people about this, but do they take him seriously? It's not 100% sure, not 100% clear. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think there are many layers to what's going on here. Um, you did also, sort of as an addendum, ask about the Laughing Storm, Lionel Baratheon. They added a lot to his character. The kind of exuberance and um, hinted interest in Dunk. I say hinted interest in Dunk. He certainly was attracted to Dunk on at least one level. So uh, for me, the biggest thing was not that, actually, and I'm glad they didn't overplay it, is that uh, he came across as very Baratheon-y in the best sense of the word. If you kind of like imagine this cross between Robert Baratheon and Renly Baratheon, you'd probably get Lionel Baratheon. He kind of came across like that. The big shift was him doing this "the only good Targaryens are dead" Targaryen speech, because it's one thing for the small folk to be there, uh, clearly not being big fans of the Targaryens, who don't have dragons at this point. It's another for someone like Raymond Fossaway to go off in the little spiel that he did about the Targaryens. They're just incestuous aliens speech. Uh, he's a really quite, in the grand scheme of things, a minor lord. Uh, he's allowed to hold these feelings in private. Um, Lionel Baratheon is, I mean, whether he's heir, he's probably heir at this point to one of the top 3 or 4 big houses in Westeros. For him to have the view that the only good Targaryen is a dead Targaryen is massive, because this means that anti-Targaryen feeling in Westeros is not just about small folk. It's not just about a handful of middling nobles. Some of the most significant noble families in this land are anti-Targaryen, very, very strongly anti-Targaryen. And he thinks that there's a war coming. Now, the implication, I think, is not, oh, another Blackfire rebellion might be around the corner. There's going to be a rebellion against the Targaryens, I think, is the implication of that. So that for me is the big shift with Lionel Baratheon, which adds an extra layer to his kind of proto-rebellion that happens many years later. That in Fire and Blood, or the World of Ice and Fire, even kind of gets written off as he was just a bit snubbed that his daughter wasn't going to be marrying into the royal family, and so he decided to start a civil war, which always felt a little bit weak, if that makes sense. It always like, oh, so okay, yeah, I get that you're snubbed and you might be really annoyed, but you want to actually single-handedly declare war against the Targaryens over it? I'm not so sure that's a good idea. If we say that he already thought the Targaryens should not be on the Iron Throne, and he already thought that there was a civil war brewing, suddenly that makes a whole lot more sense. Amelia Scales, picking up a question for Dettles. Thank you. I love it when people do this, pick up questions for others in the chat. Ashai is the furthest part of Essos, but so many characters have been there compared to other parts of Essos. Well, yes and no, I would say. So it's not the furthest part of Essos. It is the furthest part, and this is nuance, I know, but it is the furthest east part of Essos that we know about, or that anyone has been to. So further east from there, it kind of fits on this kind of like promontory that's going out, and there's some straits into a sea that heads off to the east. And sort of northeast of there, we get the Shadowlands, and then we get vague thoughts about what might be beyond that. So it's not the furthest east, it's just the furthest east that anyone we know has ever been. Lots of characters that we know have been there. Well, I would say 3 or 4 have. We know Miri Mazdur went there, Marwyn the Mage went there. Who else has been there? Corlys Velaryon went there. Quaithe went there. So yes, we've got a few characters who have been there, but that's because it's actually easier to get to than perhaps some of the more inland places, because it's actually quite a rich trading route. Now, Westerosi haven't been there much because it is such a long way away. You're taking years out of your life. If you decide to head to Ashai, this takes many months to get there, many months to get back. It's a dangerous journey. You'll probably get blown off course. This is a significant thing that you're doing if you're going to Ashai. If you're somewhere near Karth, then it's still a big journey, but you can definitely get there. So, why do people still go there? Yes, it's a scary place. Yeah, it's not somewhere you particularly want to linger, but huge gains can be made going to Ashai. If you are a merchant, one trip to Ashai with 3 or 4 ships, that could set you up for life. That's how significant this is that you can go there with things that seem pretty standard: fresh food, water, stuff that actually they don't have access to in Ashai. They sell for a lot, and Ashai seems to have a lot of gold and diamonds and various other things. So you can go and you can just take a whole load of barrels of fresh water with you, a whole load of fresh food with you, sell it to people for gold and silver and diamonds and various other things, fill up your hold and sail back, and you can be set for life. So that's why people have been there, part 1. Part 2, is that out of all of the world, that is the place that has the most preserved ancient history and knowledge and magical knowledge. Particularly now Valyria has gone, that's the place that you would go to. And that is why most of the people that we know, so Corlys Velaryon went there to explore, to be a merchant, make his fortune. But the others, Marwyn the Mage, Merry Mazdur, and Quaithe, as far as we can tell, went there because of the magic, because of the knowledge. So it is a draw in a way that some inland places that theoretically you might think are easier to get to are not. Caius Ballerina, there is a golden-haired member of the Windblown named Lewis Lannister. Is he supposed to be a member of another Lannister branch after Lannisport? A bastard that invented his own name? A coincidence? This isn't played up much. So, I don't know. There probably are some fan theories out there about this one. I have to say, I'm not up to speed with all of them. The fact is, I would say two big points here. Firstly, that some Lannisters do head off and explore the world. Geryon Lannister is the most recent example. Yes, he was going off to try and um, go to Valyria and try and get the sword back, but he also spent a reasonable amount of time in the Free Cities before that. He was a traveller before that. And the idea that he might have had children seems entirely reasonable. So I don't think this is a big surprise. So 3 points then. That's the first point. The second point is that it's made very clear when we're talking about the Golden Company, we find, and we see this from John Connington's perspective, he meets their high command and he's there thinking, oh, some of these have got names from Westeros. But he's thinking, are they really from those families? Because when you're back and some of them are saying that they're Sir, they're knighted. But he's there going, yeah, they don't keep records here. If we were in Westeros, I would believe them, but here it's not so clear. Brown Ben Plum of the Second Sons is very, he's clear about his identity. The Plums were a family over in Westeros with links to the Targaryens, incidentally. So he claims that, but nobody really checks. So I think that's the second point, is that probably is, but nobody's really going to check him. If he looks like a Lannister, if he claims Lannister heritage, it's like, okay, fine. That's not going to make much difference to his day-to-day life, apart from the fact that he's got a slightly famous name. And I think the third thing is that what did not come across on the show was that most of these families, there are way more members than we hear about, particularly the Tyrells and the Lannisters. The way the TV show kind of made it feel was that if you got rid of these 4 or 5 characters, then the entire family line would end. That's not at all the case when it comes to those families. There are many, many Lannisters out there, cousins, further cousins, that you may not even know all of their names, but they're out there as Lannisters, and just because we don't know how this person came to have the surname Lannister, that doesn't mean that they're not actually them, a real Lannister. It could actually be a real Lannister who's like a 5th or 6th cousin, has the name Lannister. They were like cadet branches of the Lannisters. Those are the Lannisters of Lannisport, just to start with. Why can't he be a Lannister? CH, I just realised that Danny's undying visions feature almost exclusively dead or soon dead people, with the only exception I can think of being Stannis. Yeah, I mean, I will come back and do a video at some point soon on Danny's visions in the House of the Undying, because th- they're not all the same, I think is the first thing to say. I think as an overall comment, you're not wrong. Most of the characters that she sees, most of the people she sees, are dead or are likely to be dead soon. But that's partly our interpretation. So she sees a whole load of the Dosh Coleen there. Are they going to die? Probably not. Um, uh, what's the focus of that vision? Probably herself. She sees a winter rose, a blue rose, emerging from a crack in an ice wall. Almost certainly that's John. He's dying, dead, but he'll come back. Does that kind of fit it? It's not 100% clear. One of them seems to be about Fagon, and um, we think he's going to die, but perhaps he's not. So it's not 100% clear. But as I say, you get um, at a very high level three types of vision here. You get the first ones, which seem to be slightly more slow and detailed. She sort of comes out into this corridor, can look through a few arches or doorways and sees things. And one of them is like, oh, there's the house with the red door. Over here, there's a kind of symbolic one that seems to be about the Seven Kingdoms ripping itself apart. Here's one over here that looks like that's Rhaegar. So the first, they're more considered. She can hear things, she can interact with them if she wanted to, ish. After that, you get the kind of the second stage, which seems quite regimented. You get statements about who she is, mother of dragons, slayer of lies, this kind of thing. And then you get the vision, 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 moving on to a new title, vision, 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 new title. And that seems very regimented. That seems very set as a structure. That's the second portion of this. The third portion is she's there effectively in the room with the Undying, and then these visions just fly at her. And we just get a sentence, and then another sentence, and then another sentence, and then another sentence. And they're just kind of whacking her one after another. So we get three different types, and I think we should probably treat them in three different ways. As an overarching comment, yeah, it is noticeable. Quite how many of these people are dead, or about to die, we think. But is that really surprising in this world? I personally don't think so. DD, has any character read the First Men's runes? Yeah, some maesters have, according to the World of Ice and Fire. That's how they get an understanding of all the stories we have that the maesters have of sort of the Dawn Age and things like that. Cake, if George were forced to release everything he has written tomorrow, how many pages do you think he has mostly ready? I assume most of the last decade has been tinkering with moving things around and worrying about plot intricacies that probably don't actually matter. Well, there's a video in there somewhere about the points at which he has told us that he's reached certain or written certain amounts of the story. We're just talking about the Winds of Wind here. The most recent, several, have suggested that he's written something like 1,100, 1,200 manuscript pages, something like 75%. Now, My best instinct is that he's probably written a few pages since then. So if I had to put a finger in the air, it would be somewhere around 80%. You can go back through his Not a Blog entries, and you can see when he sort of basically said, I finished this character's arc, I finished that character's arc, now I've got to do these kind of things. You can kind of patch together a sort of a quilt of what he's done. But the biggest thing to say is that he doesn't write in a linear way. He will get to a certain point and then go, oh, yeah, his muse has taken him off on a slight digression. You go, oh, yeah, okay, so I need to go back and change something earlier on. And then he'll go back and revise something. And he has said that at least one of the pre-release chapters that we've got has been changed. So even the stuff that we've had that we thought was set-ish in stone has shifted. So uh, how much is ready to go? I mean, about 3/4 is the answer. Um, I I think he does definitely have times when he sort of progresses in spurts. During COVID, there were a couple of years during COVID when he he said he went off to his mountain retreat, and he said he wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages. Now, even a very conservative small c interpretation of hundreds and hundreds gives that about 400 pages there. I think that most people assume that in the first few years after he'd finished *A Dance with Dragons, then he'd probably got 400 or so pages already. Some of them were chapters that he'd written for *A Dance with Dragons and then decided not to include that so that they were already stacked up. Some were some that he'd written already. So yeah, he's most of the way through, but this is the hardest bit to finish. Trisha Brady saying, hello, Robert. Loving your content and live streams. Thank you. So have jumped on the Patreon train. Thank you for hugely appreciate this. I laugh because I always nearly forget, and I think I remember every time. But patrons, thank you. I hugely appreciate your support. I can't do what I do without your support. If you want to support this channel, the best way to do it is through Patreon. There are other ways. If you want to be a channel member here, that's great. I will set up a few other ways, but the best way for me, as far as I'm concerned, is always through Patreon, and which is why I prioritize patrons' questions these live streams. So thank you very much. And while I'm doing the thanks, moderators, still doing a great job. Thank you. Trisha Brady saying, in Game of Thrones, the show, it ended with King Bran, which I always thought was a bonkers decision that made no sense in universe. What skills has he shown that he can rule? How would succession work if he can't have kids, etc.? You have mentioned in previous videos that this came from George himself. Is there a logic in the books that would explain this choice? I only read book 1. So I started picking up on this earlier, but let's dig into this Bran thing. Why do we say this comes from George R. R. Martin? Well, I don't think he's personally come out and said it or confirmed it himself, but the showrunners had somewhere between seasons 4 and 5, or the writing of seasons 4 and 5, they had a handover meeting with George R. R. Martin, which lasted a few days. And prior to that, seasons 1 to 4, George R. R. Martin had been involved and engaged in the TV show. He'd written the script. You can look. He wrote the script for an episode in each of the first 4 seasons, and he was there on hand to advise. And they're like, he wasn't a showrunner. Let's not try and pretend it was more than it actually was, but he was there. But at that point, he feel free to make your own internal comment at this. He decided he needed to focus in on finishing writing the next book, and took a step back. He was concerned that the TV show would overtake the writing of the book, and he wanted to make sure that he stayed ahead of the TV show by writing The Winds of Winter. As I said, insert your own narrative, but or commentary. But he did this handover meeting, which took place over several days, and as far as we can tell, meant that he set out what he thought at that moment in time the story would be going forward. He says that some minor characters he didn't get a chance to talk about, their ends and things like that, but the major plot lines, all of the big issues, he talked through with them. He gave it over to them, and he kind of like took a big step back. To the extent to which he talked to Michelle Fairey, I think her name is, who played Catelyn Stark, and he said something like, "Oh, see you next season," and she's like, "No, that's it. I'm dead. I'm gone now." He's like, "But Lady Stoneheart," and she's, "Nope, nope, that's not happening." And he was surprised by this, which is like the start of this kind of like he's clearly not involved conversation. So he had this handover meeting, and so from that, the showrunners said that they had 3 WTF. This is the standout thing we're told. They had 3 WTF moments, is what they said. One of them was Hodor, one of them was Shireen, and the other was Bran being king. So, for many people watching the TV show, it was a little bit jarring. It's like, oh, wow, okay, why him? Part of that, I think, was the way that Tyrion set this up with the who has a greater story than Bran. And you kind of look around and go, well, half a dozen people there at that time. Tyrion had a greater story, I would argue, than Bran. Sansa's story, Arya's story, is like who has a better story than him? You could argue a lot of characters had a better story than him. But is it different in the books? Are there things in the books that make this make sense? Well, some. First of all, I think we have to accept the fact that George R. R. Martin has said this story started with Bran. The first scene he came up with was that scene, he visualized it, that scene of the direwolf and the stag, so dead direwolf, all of the direwolf pups. And his visualization was Bran there with these direwolf pups. And at that point, it was like, okay, so probably we need to have siblings so that they can all get a pup each. At which point he started inventing the Starks, and the story branched out from that. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that his first thought was about Bran. Now, then you get is there any kind of symbolism or imagery about this that we could sort of build on? I remember after season 8, Aziz from History of Westeros, friend of the channel, he did the Eru's Own Good Work. I'm going to slightly crossing over here to other worlds, but he did fantastic work in going back through the story and trying to see, have we missed some symbolism here? Because the fandom, even people like Aziz, who have been deep in this for many a year, were like, oh, okay, did we miss something here? And his conclusion was that, yeah, actually, when you're looking for supportive evidence for Bran being king, you can find it. particularly with him having an oversight over the realm. There's lots of images of him having oversight over the realm. So that's the second thing, I guess. The third thing would be um, the idea that this isn't Bran at this point so much as the Weirwood Network. And if you say this isn't Bran who has won the Game of Thrones, this is the Weirwood Network who have assumed control of the Seven Kingdoms, that adds a completely different slant to this story that we're looking at and makes you go, yeah, maybe it's a kind of a dark way of understanding who might be ruling the Seven Kingdoms going forward, but maybe that works. Um, and then I think the last point I would make is something that they they sort of showed on the TV show, but I don't think they really did it justice to what I think the political situation is at the end of this story. If we imagine whatever happens, utter devastation. This is not going to end in like happiness and light. We're going to have the last dregs of humanity there going, okay, we need to find a ruler. And the idea that there is something akin to a great council, whoever's left over, the powerful lords and ladies of the land get together and they have to decide who's going to be ruling because the Targaryens have gone, because they don't want the Lannisters because of what Cersei did, because probably the Baratheons have gone. So who's going to rule? Now, what you had on the TV show was their equivalent of a Great Council, which was, and I can't remember the exact number, but about a dozen nobles sat in a semicircle while Tyrion talked at them. And those dozen nobles decided who was going to be king, which sounds a bit like a Great Council writ small to me. At that Great Council on the TV show, if you started looking at it, you would go, okay, so you've got Sansa, Team Stark, Bran, Team Stark, Arya, Team Stark, Brienne, sworn to Team Stark, Sam, besties with Jon, Davos, he was the hand of the king to Jon, Edmure Tully, who's clearly under Sansa's thumb. Immediately, you go, the Starks have got a majority here. Is that going to be exactly the same in the books? No. But if you look around the great houses and you think, who do we think is going to survive out of this? The Targaryens effectively will be gone. Will Stannis survive? Perhaps, but not in a strong position. We would have thought Renly's gone, Robert Baratheon's gone, Shireen's not going to be there. He's going to have a voice if he is even there. What about House Tyrell? I think there's probably a very good chance that a lot of them will be blown away. The Lannisters, almost certainly most of them will have gone. House Arryn is already down to its last couple of members now. Is there going to be many after that? The Tullys, are they going to be in a position of power now? Who actually are the people who are going to end up out of this the strongest house? Does look a bit like the Starks. And from a purely realpolitik position, who therefore is going to be in a position to dictate who the next Lord King of the Seven Kingdoms is? House Stark. So that, I think, is the logic from the books to why we get to Bran as a king. Caius Ballerina, do we know anything about the new Game of Thrones movie in the works? By Game of Thrones, do they mean A Song of Ice and Fire, sequel to the show, or just something in wider Westeros lore? Yeah, well, we do. We haven't got a green light on anything, is the first thing we have to say. But there are things in the works. There are various things in the works. But what seems to be the most developed is this idea of we're going to do Aegon's conquest next. The powers that be have not decided how they're going to adapt it, though. They just know they're going to do this. And there are two possible ways through this. Thing number one is a TV show. Thing number two is a big budget film. And both are being developed. Both are being worked through, and at some point, a decision will be made where they're going to go with this. Are they going to go with a film? Are they going to go with a TV show? Are they going to go with both? Start off with the blockbuster film or films, and then segue into TV shows for the Sons of the Dragon storyline. It's possible. So we get the person who's developing it as a TV show is Mattson Tomlin, who was the Batman, the Batman writer, and we had, and I forget his name, but also has a significant and very widely well received thing under his belt recently, is adapting this as a film. So what do we know at the moment? Not much. Two options are being considered. Presumably one or other of them will be agreed. The high level point about all of this is that given the success of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we will get more. There is no, given the fact that almost certainly we're going to have House of the Dragon's going to end after 4 seasons. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we've only got 3 books, perhaps. I mean, Ira Parker has talked about having outlines for other stories, but some of those stories are for well in the future for Duncan and Egg. Probably we've got 4, maybe 5 years worth of that. So they should now be thinking about what is the, and they're already obviously recording season 2, which means that very soon they're going to be writing season 3, which means they're already thinking about seasons 4 and 5. So if they want to carry on the momentum of this, they need to be thinking what's the next thing, and the next thing will be Aegon's conquest. They just have not yet decided how. Just going off of timings, then I think we should probably say expect an announcement at some point in the next year-ish. When we get past this next season of House of the Dragon, once they're filming season 4 of House of the Dragon, that's when it's going to start feeling to the studio execs quite real. They're coming to an end of that now. What did they do after that? They need to greenlight something. They've got other things we should probably clarify. Slight digression, all of this, obviously, but they have got other things they're working on. They're still working on the 9 Voyages of Corlys Velaryon as an animated feature in some way. They're still working on the Nymeria story. It's gone a bit quiet, but as far as we're aware, that they're still working on the Yi Ti thing. And there's this newish idea of a successor show set in Essos, perhaps featuring Arya. So there are probably a few others in the background we just don't know about yet, but all of that is potential. The one that seems the most far advanced, because, and you can usually tell on this by the amount of times that things get leaked out by the studio, just kind of testing the waters. The one that seems the most far advanced seems to be Aegon's invasion. Let's go with Lord of Medici. Kinslaying is one of the worst crimes in Westeros, as well as a huge taboo. Is this crime at all attenuated by the fact that the killing in question occurs in the context of a trial by combat and or by accident? Obviously, the question is motivated by a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, but it's also a more general question about whether there's room for nuance regarding how Westerosi society viewed one of the crimes it perceives as the gravest. So I'll take the specific point first about a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, where there is very probably a kinslaying. People say that Maekar killed his brother. Certainly that's what he thinks, that people will say it, and he thinks he probably did, and Dunk thinks he probably did. The TV show kept it as also probably did. If you look, I think I tweeted this out, somebody managed to capture a bit in the background where Maekar's swinging his mace around Morningstar. Someone who knows more about those weapons than me will probably know the exact name. I can remember being told the Morning Star wasn't what I thought it was. But anyway, he was swinging his thing around and he whacked the back of Baelor's head. And the general assumption is that that was the blow that did it. But we don't know any more than the crowd know. We get the advantage of being able to watch something back on video, analysing it, but even then, there might have been other things that we missed because most of our attention on the TV show is on Duncan and Aerion. Other stuff is going on around there, but we don't see everything that happens there. So, from our perspective, us the viewer, then probably this was Maekar. As the reader, probably this was Maekar. But we can't be 100% certain. So, yes, I think the fact that happened there in trial by combat and that it was by accident does seem to attenuate the circumstances. I'll get onto this more general point in just one second. In this circumstance, what mattered actually more, and this is often the case with George R. Martin, is not whether technically actually this happened or that happened. It's what people believe. And if what people believe is that Maekar killed his brother, then that is what is going to affect the plot. It won't affect the plot whether he actually did. It will affect the plot if people think he did. As for the broader point, which is, does this actually matter? George R. R. Martin has actually said something about this. He said there are degrees in kinslaying, as in anything else. Fighting a battle in which a brother dies might be frowned upon, but killing him with your own hand would be considered far worse. So, yes, there's an intentionality there, and there's also if you're in a battle with someone, not just a trial of seven, but if you're facing somebody in combat, you shouldn't try not to kill your Blackfire relative because they're your relative. People will go a bit easier on it. Okay, let's go to another question from Lord Medici. We are told that from the top of the high tower, one can see the wall. Castley Rock, we are told, is 3 times as tall as the high tower or the wall. And Castley Rock is also further north than High Tower, so it's closer to the wall. So if one can see the wall from the top of the high tower, one should, a fortiori, be able to see it from Castley Rock. And yet, there is no mention of the wall being visible from the top of Castley Rock. Isn't this a bit weird? Well, I think we shouldn't take this claim as kind of literal truth. You can go to the top of the high tower and peer out and go, oh, yep, there's the wall. I can see it over there. That's hundreds of miles away, hundreds of kilometers. It's if you imagine in whichever country you're at, something hundreds and hundreds of miles away, even if you're atop of a tall building and you like squint it out, would you be able to see it? How far can you see from the tallest building in New York? Miles, but not hundreds and hundreds of miles. I went up the Empire State Building once, which is great, fantastic experience, amazing views. I could see a long way to the end of Manhattan, but could I see all the way to Washington, say? No, because my eyesight's not good enough. And unless you've got Legolas there, then I don't think you can physically see all that far. So, and added to which, if you actually look at the map, there's like mountains and stuff in the way. So this idea that you can see the wall from the top of the high tower, I don't think we're supposed to take it literally. I think there are two things. One is this kind of mental link we're supposed to make between the high tower and the wall, which is partly there by the legend that Bran the Builder was the person behind the construction of both. But I think also we're trying to be shown, or George R. R. Martin is trying to show us a link between these things, trying to make us think. So the high tower isn't just a random tall building, which was over here, has no relevance to the rest of the story. I think he's wanting to say, okay, this does have some sort of a connection over there. What's the connection? Well, I won't bore you again with my Isles theory / observation, but I think there's more going on there than we might otherwise know. And I think the other thing is, if we're saying that you can see it, and it's clear you can't see it just through human eyesight, then maybe there's some kind of magical means. Maybe they've got a glass candle and they can see stuff from up there. Maybe there's some other magic. There are hints of the high towers doing magic up there. Maybe that's what's going on. But yeah, it's trying to show us a connection, and it's trying to hint at magical means. Pancho Killer, Ira Parker said that he left Dunk's knighting ambiguous. I can't possibly see how that's the case, given how it was on screen. What do you think? Is it still ambiguous to you? So this comes not just from Ira Parker, this is from George R. R. Martin, apparently. He asked for whether Dunk got knighted to remain, I don't know if the word was ambiguous, but not 100% confirmed either way, is probably the way I would put this. I think it's pretty clear from the stories that he was not knighted. I think I did a video on this a while ago, but I think when you read through this, when you look at Dunk's thinking in the first couple of pages, and he's thinking about, what do I do now? Southerland's dead. Well, maybe I could try and be a squire to someone else. All of his thinking is about, he's a squire. What does he do next as a squire? And then he has an idea, and then we see him heading off to Ashford. And then every time this concept of how did he get knighted? Can he do the things a knight should be able to do? He falters. His ears go red. His conscience will not let him actually do the things that only a knight can do, like knight somebody else. He's like, no, I don't think I should. The clear implication, I think, in the stories is that he wasn't knighted. Added to which, you get this internal monologue when you get him saying he knew what it was like to want something so much that he would deceive everyone, that kind of thing. So I think it's pretty clear there, but never 100% confirmed, which is where we're at, I think, with the TV show, is that they don't ever show one way or the other. They get quite close a few times. When you get the Raymond Fossaway being knighted, and then you just kind of get this like change in perspective, and you get Dunk there looking up in his mind's eye to Sir Arlen, "You gonna knight me?" And he's just like, "Yeah." And then later on, episode 6, Dunk is like, "Why did you never knight me?" It seems pretty clear. Ira Parker said, well, we don't know. We already had one fake out death there. Perhaps he didn't die at that point. Perhaps after that, he then sort of got up and said, oh, I never did before, but I'm going to do this now. Da, 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 da. And then he died. So George apparently wanted it to remain a bit vague. Ira Parker did what he did and left it not 100%. So that's where we're at. I think it's pretty clear. But as I say, it's not 100%. But it's what for me. It's like one of those things. It's like R plus L equals J. Is um, I can't tell you 100% that R plus L equals J uh, because it's not written down anywhere. We don't have a POV of this happening. We don't have full documentary evidence of it. But if it's not the case, then what on earth are we doing? It's that George R. R. Martin has written every single thing to show that that is what happened. Um, and I think the same is the case for Dunk not being knighted. Everything he wrote kind of underlines that point. So, um, uh, is it still ambiguous? I don't think it's ambiguous. I think it's pretty clear, but it's 99.9% clear. H boy, George R. R. Martin says dragons don't roam, and riders bond with one dragon. Danny bonded Drogon, so can ride him, but not the other two. If they lair near Marine, how could Jon or Aegon ride them? Dragon binder for one, maybe. It's an interesting question. So, you would have to go back, and I haven't obviously got the exact words to hand. This comes from his blog post when he was sort of moaning about House of the Dragon. And I say sort of moaning, actually moaning about House of the Dragon. And one of the touchstones for this was this idea that Sheepstealer would have just flown up of its own volition to the Vale of Arryn. And he said that basically, no, that this doesn't happen. The dragons, they pick a place, they stay there. They will fly around and try and find things to eat, but they're not going to just sort of like roam off to somewhere else just because. And he said that this was important because otherwise, you get lots of unclaimed dragons in the Targaryen era who stay where they are. They stay on Dragonstone or wherever, just waiting for somebody to come and ride them or bond with them. And that was also the case in Old Valyria. There were lots of unclaimed dragons. If dragons did roam, that would have meant that when the Doom of Valyria happened, dragons would be all over the place because they're just roaming. That's just what they do. The fact that dragons do not roam means that they were all concentrated in with a handful of other examples that George R. R. Martin does tell us about. But the vast majority of dragons were all concentrated in that one place because they do not roam, which means that they were all killed. And so he says, basically, this might sound like a minor point that a dragon would not have flown of its own volition from Dragonstone over to the Vale of Arryn. But actually, this is really important to the entire world. Everything would have been, the entire story would have been different. So this is the kind of the toxic butterflies thing that he often talks about. So, all of that said, how do the other two dragons make their way from Meereen across to Westeros? If Dany has bonded with Drogon and is riding Drogon, she hasn't yet proven that she can control Drogon. It has to be said. But let's assume she does. Let's assume she kind of figures it out in time. What about the other two? George R. R. Martin, as I say, we don't have. I don't have to hand the exact quote from him, but it's something like, "Of their own volition, they will not go." would if Dany wants them to go, she is in a unique position as not just like bonded to Drogon, but also mother of dragons. Would she be able to? She might not be able to ride them, but would she be able to kind of persuade them they should come with her? It feels possible. Would she be able to get Drogon to kind of herd them? Again, it feels possible. I think there are ways around this. Your idea of Dragonbinder, perhaps capturing one, I think that's entirely possible. Yeah. So um, the bit of lore that we've got as a Lord gap is what ways can you get dragons that aren't bonded to someone but do have a mother of dragons? uh, is it possible for in that situation for Dany to not be riding them and making them go somewhere, but sort of gently encouraging them in the same way that she brought them with her all this time? They kind of followed her along. They were flying with her when they were little. Obviously, they were just like she would take them around and they were kind of reliant on her. She would feed them, etc. Is that principle going to carry on? I think the implication is yes, because hers is a pretty unique situation. Wilma, uh, who would be your ideal Targaryen founding three in the coming film? Please, not Henry Cavill. Okay, in terms of actors, I always struggle with this naming uh, actors who would work for roles. And part of the reason I struggle is that I think probably out of all of the TV shows I've ever known, whoever are the casting people, and I don't even know the same people for each of the shows, the casting people for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms was brilliant. I think they got so many great people. Ditto House of the Dragon, ditto Game of Thrones. They hit the success rate of casting there through the roof. And a lot of the time, it's actors that are completely new. Nobody knew who Peter Claffey was or Dexter Sol Ansel was. Ansel was beforehand. I mean, I'm sure they were known within the trade, but as far as I'm concerned, no, I would never have guessed them, and yet I'm now 100% supportive of them. So I like the idea of not doing actors who've got big names. That's just my general take, and also it has to be said that um, Game of Thrones world has tended not to do big name actors for things. The the biggest names in terms of sort of star power, I mean, Matt Smith is obviously very well known. Sean Bean was obviously very well known, but they've not gone for Hollywood megastars. They've gone for people who are well known and respected within the industry. Um, Broadly speaking, the the policy seems to be either people that George R. R. Martin specifically said, so like he wanted Sean Bean, he wanted Peter Dinklage, um, or unknown people that they've just gone, yeah, you fit this role, or um, often British talented actors who've been around for a while, like Diana Rigg, Charles Dance, who are well known and well respected, but not megastars in their own right. Um, I mean, Daniel Ings, incidentally, in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, probably he's with the greatest respect to Daniel Ings, I don't think he's quite yet on the Diana Rigg, Charles Dance level of sort of name recognition, but he is a very well known actor. He was known. He's been in things like The Crown. He actually, incidentally, fun fact, he auditioned for a couple of different parts in Game of Thrones, and didn't get them, so he was on their radar already. Um, all of which leads me to back to your question, which is who would I therefore put as the original three Targaryens if I were doing an Aegon's invasion? And I would suggest that one or two of them should be people I don't even know. Um, I've always liked this idea ever since I watched Vikings. Somebody suggested it, and I watched it. Catherine Winnick, I think, would make a great Visenya. I think that would be great. Um, sort of casting. I mean, I think there's a couple of people I could probably suggest for Rhaenys. As for Henry Cavill, I've got a lot of time for Henry Cavill. I think he does, yeah, many good things, but um, if he is to be a part of the Game of Thrones world, and I think it's a very big if, um, given the fact that they don't tend to do the megastars for good reason, I think. Um, because it would then just be about the megastar. Now, starring Henry Cavill, we have no, that isn't quite the feel they're going for. They want the story to be the main sort of thing that people are talking about, not particular actor in it. If he is to be in it, it would be a flashback in season 2 of House of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms to Daemon Blackfire, who should be this um, um, Adonis of a human being, who should be this great fighter, look good in a blonde wig, but in a flashback, so we probably don't even hear him talk. I think that would work for me, and I think that would work for a lot of people. Is that he just kind of fits that kind of chiseled jawed kind of look. This is complete digression, forgive me for it, but I always remember um, many years ago, Kenneth Branagh did a version of Hamlet, if you've ever seen it, on film. I remember I watched it at the cinema. It's a good 4.5 hours long, I think it was. Had a break halfway through. Well worth it. Astonishing cast. And one of the things that I can remember coming away with was that they had in non-speaking parts, in just kind of flashbacks, they had Judi Dench and John Gielgud, who, you know who Judi Dench is. John Gielgud was a legendary actor of his own right. And I can remember thinking, how good is this cast if they can have those two people in non-speaking roles, just like here's a flashback of some other people. That's the kind of feel I would like for it. As I say, big digression, but the answer is no. I don't want Henry Cavill. I've got time and respect for Henry Cavill, but I don't want him to be Aegon the Conqueror. Akim Wade, what do you think of the dragon skeletons seeming to be alive, just like the Stark statues? Okay, so this is the dragon skulls. I'm assuming you're talking about the dragon skulls beneath the Red Keep. So when the Targaryens were ruling the Seven Kingdoms, the throne room, the Great Hall, you can picture it, had dragon skulls in it. Some massive Balerion the Black Dread, huge dragon skulls. When Robert won his rebellion, he said, "Well, I'm not having them. I'm not a Targaryen. They can go." But he didn't want to get rid of them, so he just kind of like put them down in the cellar. And we get a a few times characters go down there, but we get a couple of times in particular that are seen as quite constructive, or instructive, I would say. Arya goes down there. That's where she is. If you remember book one, when Varys and Illyrio come up and they're chatting to each other and they're sort of wandering through, and she hears stuff she doesn't understand all of it. We, looking back, understand a lot more of what they're talking about. She was hiding in a dragon skull. And the language used there is so sharp. It's so, she's going there. She can feel them, the sharpness of the mouth, as if it's going to close down on her. She can, as if their eyes are on her. They are. written as if they're alive and do not like her being there. The other perspective we get in book one is Tyrion, who remembers back to it, and he remembers them lovingly about how he enjoyed being in it. There's no hint of this animosity there. And this adds to the is Tyrion a secret Targaryen kind of theory, and is one of those things where you go, the first half of book one, the amount of Tyrion Targaryen imagery we get is massive. It tails off a lot for the next few books, but it's massive. So, is this the same as the Stark statues? There are echoes, it has to be said. The difference, I would argue, is that the Stark statues always seem to be anthropomorphized. Whenever anybody walks past them, they feel the statues looking at them. The more Starky people feel them judging them or thinking or whatever. Ned Stark definitely does. Added to which, there's another layer of lore and history and legend attached to it, where it's the spirits of the dead Starks are held down there. We're supposed to think that the spirits of the Starks are inhabiting them. At no point are we told that the spirits of the dead dragons or the dead Targaryens are tied in there. It seems to be just being used as a kind of a symbolic measure for who is there, a kind of a how should we be? How would the dragons react? Not suggesting that they are still alive in some way. Interesting question, though. Wilma, what age should the three be in the Conquest film? Good question. So I don't know the exact age off the top of my head, but we're talking um, early 30s. I think is probably the best way we would put it. The hints we get around this are to do with Aegon. He had these two sister wives. By the time of the invasion, they'd not got any children between them. Rhaenys falls pregnant after a few years after the invasion. When she dies, and her child at the time, Aenys, he just seems to regress. It doesn't come across at all as the kind of the strong heir to the Targaryen rule that some might want. That's when Visenya seems to go, right, oh no, I need to get a baby now. I need a stronger heir, and heads off, and that's where we get Maegor emerging on the scene. And we're told at that point, I can't remember the exact age, I think she was 41, something along those lines. So when we're talking about what age are they at the time of the invasion, then we're talking early 30s, that kind of thing. Let's go to Laura Lay Dragons saying, Happy Thursday, and to you. I've wondered whether part of the reason the fandom around A Song of Ice and Fire is so active is because there are so many unknowns. Obviously, the world is rich and complex, the characters relatable, etc. But there's also the factor that the story is incomplete. It leaves a lot of room for discussion and speculation and fanfic. Do you agree? And do you ever indulge in fanfiction? Well, as for fanfiction, I don't write it. Personally, very happy for people to write it as an expression of their love for this world. George R. R. Martin is not a big fan, it has to be said, of fan fiction set in his world, which I can understand and sympathize with. I did actually recently see somebody did, I think, as a cooperative effort, trying to write The Winds of Winter as fans, chapter by chapter, as if George R. R. Martin had written it. Which I thought was quite fun. I read a little bit of it, but yeah, I've never really indulged in that side of the fandom. As for why is it so popular, as in why has it got such an engaged fan base? I think you're absolutely right. The mystery that is still there, the fact that it's unfinished, the fact that there are still mysteries that we do not understand, is absolutely a part of this. Um, I do think, though, that there's also an element of having the world's most successful TV show ever has engendered um, fandom. A lot of people came into this through the TV shows. Um, and the fact that we're still getting new stuff every few years. Now, it doesn't feel like it, for those of us who have been sitting here waiting for the next book for a long time, it might feel quite frustrating. But we have to acknowledge the fact that we've had The World of Ice and Fire, we've had Fire and Blood, we've had House of the Dragon, we've had A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, we're soon to have the stage play. Every couple of years, we're getting a new thing, which just gives us extra bits of information. So I suspect that a lot of the speculation would have calcified to a degree if we hadn't had new information. Getting the new information just gives us. So, for example, when we got the clear message that Aegon had had a vision, he'd had a dream, and which was part of what prompted him to be invading the Seven Kingdoms. That's not just a House of the Dragon thing. George gave the thumbs up to that. That's the kind of thing that makes everybody within the fandom go, "Oh, okay, so this makes us view all of this in a slightly different way. We might have suspected that was the case before, but now we know." And similarly, some of the things that have been coming out recently about Duncan and Egg. Dunk survived Summerhall. What? What does that mean? That has created this continual kind of drumbeat of things that we can look at anew. So it's not just the same world with like people coming out with increasingly esoteric takes on. It's actually a world that has new information that we can build new ideas off of on a regular basis. Corvus Corax saying, "Good evening, Robert, Dan, and all. Any good hotel and pub recommendations in Stratford? Thinking about seeing a play there this summer." Well, I assume you're thinking about seeing The Cherry Orchard, starring Kenneth Branagh and Helen Hunt, which I'm personally looking forward to. So if that's what you're looking forward to as well, then which will be in Stratford in I think May to June. Um, uh, there's a lot of great pubs in Stratford. If you've never been there, the Dirty Duck is a fantastic pub. I've got a soft spot for the Garrick on the High Street. Great oak beamed, low ceilings. Mind your head. But good beer. The Dirty Duck, they're right, near the riverside, the River Avon. Their casks Vale are chilled by the river water. So there's a lot of great pubs. You can't really go wrong, to be honest. But I think in terms of sort of restaurants, there's a whole load of Sheep Street that's your go-to place for a sort of pre-theatre eating. There's I think it's Lambs was quite good. I went. As you can tell, I have been a few times to Stratford. They do good pre-theatre menus in a few places around there. But the one thing I would say is, if you've not been to Stratford before, just give it a day. Don't just treat it as I'm just going to go to the theatre. Get up there and treat yourself to a day. It's perfect sized place just to wander around and experience things for a day. Shakespeare's birthplace, fantastic old building. You can wander down the river to past the swans and the people in boats and stuff like that, to the great old church with Shakespeare's where Shakespeare was buried. Just wander around the town for a bit. It's delightful, I would say. So that's the end of the Stratford upon Avon tourist broadcast. It's worth a day trip, is what I'm saying. Not just going there watch a play and then go away again. Flame G saying, hello, Robert. I hope you're doing well. I am, thank you. My question is, how could Bran or Bloodraven cross the wall if they're with magical abilities? Does the wall only limit the passage of magical creatures like dragons and creatures that can cast spells, or visual magic like the Children of the Forest? The answer is we don't know. I'm afraid this is not clear. The George R. R. Martin likes to keep his magic unclear, slightly vague, that we can't categorize it. What I think he would hate is this idea that we had some kind of a formula for the wall, and you could go, oh, well, technically that means that what the others could do is this. Or technically that means that you could go and do. He doesn't want that kind of technicality thing going on. He just wants quite a high level uh, loose and light magic system. Now, what we know is the things that it stops are the undead in some way. Cold hands can't cross there. And this is clearly meant as a barrier to the others and the whites. The whites, however, when they were carried through by the Night's Watch, they could pass through. It also seems to stop a dragon, Silverwing, who tries to fly over. So, but it obviously doesn't stop magic users like Bran or even Jojen from crossing over. Bloodraven clearly crossed over. So, what's going on there? I mean, if I had to sort of characterize it as best I could, magical beings cannot pass through. So beings that in and of themselves are magical. People who can do magic can pass through. So the dragon, a dragon is a magical being. It is powered by magic in a way. The whites were magical beings. They were powered by magic. However, and similarly, Cold Hands powered by magic in some way. However, Bloodraven, Bran, yes, they can do magic, and yes, it's an important part of who they are. But if you stripped the magic out away from them, perhaps it's now slightly different with Bloodraven. But for Bran, if you strip the magic away, he's still a human. He can still do stuff. So that seems to be how he can pass across. Now, is that the full extent of it? Probably not. The fact that George R. R. Martin keeps this vague means that he can tweak it and shift it and catch us by surprise slightly. So expect it not to be exactly what we're thinking. There will be some differences, but I think the overall message we've got is that this is a barrier to the others and the whites. That's its main purpose. Other things might be caught by that. So the dragon not being able to cross it seems to be part of that. But it isn't there to stop the children of the forest moving to and fro, for example. That's the angel. Chinese, Korean culture and myth. The sun equals the king and the moon equals the queen. There can only ever be one of each or doom follows. Once there were two moons in the sky, Rhaenys, Meraxes, both queens, both in dawn being shot down. Thoughts? So I think my take is that George R. R. Martin gets heavy inspiration from history, less inspiration from sort of mythology and stuff like that. Tolkien loved all of that stuff, particularly when you get kind of like Norse mythology and things like that. That would be wrapped up within his own sort of world. George R. R. Martin, it appears lesser. He creates his magical world. I'm not personally persuaded that there is much by way of him being inspired by Eastern mysticism in order to make some kind of meta point about what's going on. The idea that we get, that once there were two moons in the sky is a legend from the Dothraki. Perhaps that were true. Um, uh, the idea that you would have then two queens with the initial Targaryen invaders. Well, yeah, but there have been two queens since in many different ways, and I don't think that necessarily means they're going to die because of it. I think George R. R. Martin cares more about kind of historical symmetry, would be the way I would put it, than matching Chinese or Korean myths. I'm sure he'd be fascinated by them, but I don't think he has mapped his story onto them, if it kind of makes sense. So, yeah, I mean, we get this quite a lot when we're sort of like looking at this kind of like, stars and imagery like that. But um, I think he uses the stars to tell us about the characters rather than using the stars to be guiding the events. So John looks up to the ice dragon a lot, and that's because George R. R. Martin is trying to, which is a star in the sky in their world, which is George R. R. Martin trying to tell us ice dragon, fire and ice, Stark and Targaryen, little clues. That I think is what he does, is he takes those kinds of things as hints to what's going on with the characters, rather than as this is what has caused what is going on. Let's go to a question from Dustin Wilson saying, "Hi Robert, I like the theories concerning the connection between Euron and Bloodraven. If Bloodraven was at one point interested in Euron, why? It's hard for me to believe that one with all of the knowledge of the past and potentially the future could even make mistakes, let alone one this apocalyptic." Yeah, so first of all, I don't think that Bloodraven can see the future, in as much as I mean, he once rather poetically talked about the mists and sort of seeing things through the mists. He does not get a clear view of what's going on in the future. So that's the sort of the basic thing here, which means that when he was looking for who is going to be, I think he probably knew he needed another green seer. And it appears that he cast his net wide. All of those who might get green dreams, he would charge into their dreams. The same thing we saw with Bran, where we had this vision of he was falling and this crow was telling him you should fly, and there's lots of spikes on the floor, and he didn't fly in time, etc., etc. It seems that that vision may well have gone out to a number of different people. Euron is one of them. We think this because at one point he does sort of talk about, when I was young, I thought I could fly. And then we get the imagery that he uses. He's the one-eyed crow. Bloodraven, a crow, has one eye. All of that's there, and then he leans in to the shade of the evening tree juice, which gives him these visions, and that is very much set up as this kind of opposite of the weirwood tree paste. So the implication is that Bloodraven reached out to him because he was possibly what he was looking for, but there was some disconnect. Maybe Bloodraven saw what he was like and decided nope. But I think the key point here is that Bloodraven did not know exactly beforehand who Bran was, or who the person who Bran was going to be was. And so he was casting his net wide, seeing who else was out there. General Amberg. Hi, Robert. Why did Ned raise Jon like a High Lord's son alongside his own children? Did he simply want to prepare him for life as best as possible, or did he have a plan for when Jon would learn the truth? So I think underlying this is this thought that if you really wanted to keep Jon a secret, you wouldn't raise him as part of the family. Yeah, sure, you might say, I've got this baby because this is my bastard son, and you bring him up north. But then what most people would have expected was what Cat expected, was that he would then sort of set him up somewhere with a friendly minor lordling and occasionally send him a gift or something like that. Acknowledge he's there, but not make a big thing of it. That was what Cat kind of expected from this situation. It's worth saying that Cat does not blame Ned for having a bastard child. She kind of accepts that. Is like that's just what lords do. But what she doesn't like is the fact that Jon got set up in the household so that she was constantly reminded of it. She wanted it. She wanted him put somewhere a little bit out of sight. So, why did Ned do that? Where he could have just pushed Jon somewhere else, and people would have forgotten about him. As it was, everybody always remembered, oh yeah, Ned Stark's got that bastard son, he's been raising him. Everyone knew him. Is it because he was training him up for the moment where he could do the big reveal and actually you're Rhaegar and Lyanna's son? Um, that might be a part of it. It might be that that's what he promised Lyanna. Uh, Maybe she said, "Promise me, Ned." He remembers promises that he broke, which seems to imply that he must have made more than one promise to her. He didn't just promise that he would protect Jon. He made a lot of promises. Um, Perhaps he promised that he would raise Jon as if he were his own son. Perhaps it was as simple as that, or perhaps he didn't, and he just thought, you know what, this he is family. Ned's actually he is an honourable man, and Ned wants the right thing, and this child was his sister's child. This was his nephew, and the idea that his nephew would grow up, at some minor lordling's place, not knowing Stark culture, I think that probably would have hurt Ned. So uh, perhaps there's a promise, or perhaps it's just Ned being Ned. Um, he took the hit. Once he decided he was taking the hit from everyone for you've got a bastard child, and I think he just decided, you know what, I'll just lean into it. Geer, I'm trying to understand the magic and why things that must be must be. Targaryens must be on the throne. They're the only ones that make the deal to have dragons' dreams and have to fight the others. So, when do the others start coming from the north? Well, when did they reappear? We don't know exactly, but our best guess, based on the fact that they've clearly been around for a little while. Mance Rayder was gathering the wildlings together for a few years in the face of a threat, which means that they knew about this well before the Night's Watch knew about this. And then you get Craster, who's been sacrificing his sons to the others for quite some time. Our best guess is probably, well, with Craster, it's at least a couple of generations worth, 30, 40 years, maybe. It's hard to say exactly, but that's the kind of ballpark that we're talking about. How long have dragons been missing, and do they, the others, I think, know there are no dragons? Well, the last dragon was about 150 years before the main story. Do the others know that there are no dragons? Well, perhaps, perhaps not. George R. Martin has kept so much about the others secret from us. One thing which is apparent, though, is that for those who are more magically inclined, as we might expect the others to be, they become aware when the dragons have returned. When Danny's dragons are hatched, suddenly the ambient level of magic in the world goes up a notch. Suddenly, the fire magicians in Karth get to do even more impressive fire magic. Suddenly, the glass candles start working again. Suddenly, and for me, most noticeably, the pyromancers, who we don't think of as being particularly magical, but they are working with fire magic. Um, Suddenly, they like turn to Tyrion and go, "This is a weird question, but have dragons returned? Because all of our stuff is now a whole lot easier to do." So those who are more magically inclined, particularly when it comes to fire magic, seem to notice the return of the dragons. Does that include the others? Well, they're obviously ice magic rather than fire magic. But if we're saying this is all ultimately roughly the same, yeah, I instinctively I think they know that the dragons have returned. But by this point, they're well on their way in their plan. So they've been marching forward for quite some time by the time the dragons arrive. Um, so Steve the O, late to the party, but I managed to binge all 6 episodes of The Night of the Seven Kingdoms. What a ride. Great show. You've discussed a lot already, so nothing to add for now, except a true knight always finishes a story. A hopeful wink to George R. Martin. Yeah, so this was when Sir Arlen has his fake out and comes back and he says, a true knight always finishes a story. A lot of people have thought this is depending on how charitable you're being, either a sort of a nod or a dig at George R. R. Martin. Given the relationship between Ira Parker and George R. R. Martin, I don't think this was a dig. But yeah, it's hard not to see that line as a Song of Ice and Fire fan without thinking that that's a sort of an implicit George will do this. He's keeping on working at it. And from our perspective, we're here thinking, oh, he's not done anything. But from his perspective, he's working at it. Uh, Sarah Arpagos saying, hi, Robert, hope you're good. I am, thank you. Maybe weird question, but what is the status of a wife if her husband is taking the black, like Ned was supposed to do? Do you think she is considered a widow by society or still married, despite her husband swearing an oath not to take a wife? Well, it is a weird question, but it's a good one. We're not, again, we're not told exactly, but the legal status, such that is within Westeros of somebody who goes to the wall seems to be as if they died. And what I mean by that is that they go to the wall, and whatever crimes they've done, that's just expunged off to the system. That's gone. And whatever land or titles or honors they held, they still get to call themselves sir or whatever, but any land or um, sort of like titles over lord or whatever are there, they're gone. When Jeor Mormont joined the Night's Watch, then he's no longer lord of the Mormonts. That's it. The title passed to his son. So that seems to be our best way of understanding this. We actually have a surprisingly small number of people who've gone up to the Night's Watch that we know were married. But the implication, I think, is that yes, the marriage is effectively declared null and void. It's gone now. So we don't, I think, have a record of a wife remarrying, but the implication is that all of that is gone now. Yeldenil, I hope you and Dan are well and happy. We are, thank you. If Brienne mirrors Dunk in certain ways, what do you think that might mean for her future and Podrick's future, if we consider him to be some kind of mirror to Egg? Thank you, and my regards to the mods and my fellow patrons. So, we talk a lot about this mirroring because George R. R. Martin does this a lot. Yes, Brienne is a sort of a mirror to Dunk. That I think is beyond doubt. Not just in the height, physicality, the way they fight, and their moral character. Also, we get her wandering around the Seven Kingdoms on these great quests, accompanied by Pod. So rather than Egg, we have Pod. You kind of get the linguistic link there as well. Does this mean we should expect her fate to be in some way mirroring what happened to Dunk? Well, not necessarily, but entirely possibly. This idea that you could, I mean, obviously on the TV show, she suddenly becomes Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, which would be an echo of Dunk. So is that going to happen in the books? I mean, her becoming, I mean, she was made a member of Renly's Kingsguard. After all this is finished, to be made a member of whoever the king then is Kingsguard, yeah, that works for me. So what does this mean for Pod? Is he an echo of Egg then? Well, I don't think Pod is going to suddenly become king. I think whereas we get Brienne as a clear echo of Dunk, I think Pod is a part of that echo, not actually being an echo of Egg himself, if that makes sense. So he is a part of what makes Brienne the echo of Dunk. He is not the person. He's not in and of himself an echo of Egg. Dagan saying, "Hi Robert. I've been wondering how humans become greenseers and what Westerosi legend actually meant by the last hero. Do you think the Pact may have been the creation of the human greenseer and why the first men began worshipping the old gods? These human greenseers may have been the heroes referred to in legend when they say the age of heroes. I've read in world mythology that an older meaning so in real world mythology, that an older meaning of the word hero was an individual who wasn't quite a god, but not mortal either. The last hero is an odd term, but it sounds sort of like the last greenseer. I think this legend wasn't referring to a mortal man running around with a sword who somehow defeats the others and saves the day, but is instead referring to the last greenseer. There seem to be parallels between the journey the last hero is said to have undertaken in seeking the children and Bran's journey seeking the three-eyed crow. Thoughts? Yeah, well, yes, there are echoes, I think, there. This one guy with his companions and a dog heading north, meeting the children of the forest, and they're getting the answers, support, pardon me, that will allow them to defeat the others. Yes, there are definite echoes. How did human greenseers come about? My personal view is that probably this is from intermarriage with the children of the forest. But it's just the first men, pretty much, or descendants of the first men who seem to get this. And we have strong hints that at least some of the first men did intermarry with the children of the forest, being House Reed and the Crannig men. So that's probably how it got into sort of the last men bloodstream, as it were. As what were the other points we got going on here? Yeah, regarding the last hero, I agree. The last hero is an odd way of saying it for a story which happened thousands of years ago. To say that person was the last hero, there have been heroes since. the legends have other heroes since then. So it strikes me as being a sort of a slight vulgarization, sort of mistranslation of an earlier, more accurate bit of nomenclature going on. So it would make sense to me that this is like the last hero of this war, or the greatest and final hero in this epic battle against the others, or something along those lines, which just got shortened to the last hero. That kind of, I mean, this is thousands of years ago, this character, in the same way that I love uh, Robin Hood. I don't know if you ever saw it. Back in the 80s, there was a great adaptation, I think it was BBC, called Robin of Sherwood, one of my favorite Robin Hood adaptations. And they worked really well on this idea that Robin Hood was the name we got. Robin Hood comes from Robin in the Hood. He is a guy who wore a hood, and it just got contracted down to Robin Hood. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then you can imagine after even more thousands of years that might shift again a little bit. So the last hero, as a concept, it sounds a little odd, but I think if you just imagine it as being a contraction of a slightly longer description of somebody, that works for me. Is there a link across to the last Green Seer? Well, the last Green Seer, they imagine this is the last Green Seer. The big picture here seems to be there were lots of Children of the Forest, and they had Green Seers. Green Seers were rare, but they had them. But now there's not many Children of the Forest left at all. And so they've kind of accepted the fact that there are no more Green Seers going to happen. Oh, except suddenly this guy appears. One of the humans is a Green Seer, and we've managed to tempt him up north and hook him up to the Weirwood network. Now he's the last Green Seer. That's the kind of feel I think we've got going on from there. Okay, that was the last of my A Song of Ice and Fire questions, but please do drop some more questions in the chat if you so wish. I've got 3 or 4 Lord of the Rings questions. Pardon me. Feel that one brewing for a moment. Lord of the Rings questions. Alsbeta M saying, hello, Robert. How do you think the destinies of Numenor, Gondor, Arnor, etc., might have turned out differently if King Tar Elendil hadn't passed over his daughter Silmarion as his heir, given that Elendil was actually descended from her line? Okay, so this is way back in the history of Numenor. And the fourth, I think, fourth king of Numenor was Tar Elendil, and he decided to pass over his firstborn child, which was Silmarion, a daughter, and give the crown to his secondborn child, his firstborn son. Now, that was the it wasn't the written law of the land, but that was the sort of the practice that had the heritage that had been passed down to them. A little bit later, when you got to Tar Aldarion, he codified into law the idea it's the firstborn child, because he just had a daughter. So he codified that it was the firstborn child, not the firstborn son. And so from that moment on, yes, there were some 3 Numenorian queens, ruling queens. So what would have happened if that had been the law a little bit earlier, and we had Silmarion ruling? Well, the line does descend down to the Elendil Isildur that we know. This is the faithful. Would that line of faithful have still been there? Would they have been the ruling powers? Would they have kept Numenor from slipping? It's entirely possible. Perhaps they would have been stronger. Numenor. Perhaps they would not have fallen in the same way. Perhaps there would have been more opposition to Sauron. Um, but this is all perhaps. It's we're talking thousands of years of history, and whereas Tolkien does go very strongly into kind of bloodlines and this is good and strong bloodline and this is the weaker, etc. I I I think we're talking about such huge amounts of time that it's quite hard to say. Certainly, if you go down this idea that Numenor wouldn't have fallen because they had stronger and better leaders, then we wouldn't have got Gondor. We wouldn't have got Arnor like that. So the entire history of Middle Earth would have changed. Question from For My Peoples, a Song of Ice and Fire question. Is Euron's potential as a Greenseer proof that Iron Islanders are first men descended? I don't think it's proof, but I think it's very strongly hinted. George Martin doesn't go heavy on this. It's just the hints. They have their own stories. The Iron Islanders have their own stories about how they came to be. But it's noticeable that sort of the names and a lot of yes, they've developed different religions and traditions, but a lot of the kind of the lifestyle, the hardness of the lifestyle, and as we've seen, a lot of the names are very similar between the two. So yeah, I don't think it's conclusive evidence, but I think it is definitely evidence. Trisha Brady. I was never a big fan of the Hobbit movies. I preferred the book, but I have a sweet spot for the interactions between Gandalf and Galadriel, maybe just because of how Kate and Ian played it. While it doesn't align with their book counterparts, I was curious as to your thoughts on it. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I loved it. I mean, I'm thinking, I suspect many people are, of that there's that wonderful scene in is it the first Hobbit movie? I can't remember. When they have this Council of the White and White Council, and they kind of disperse, and then Galadriel's there, and Gandalf's about to turn and go, and she says, "Gandalf, why the halfling?" And he just has this little moment, and he's sort of like, "Why? Well, perhaps because he gives me strength. He is. It's you can remember the scene. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's beautifully acted, and it sums up for me the feel of what's there. I would say of the not just the characters, but also the feel of what Tolkien was trying to put across. What I would say is that it does show us an element of Gandalf that we don't otherwise really see, I think, in the films, or don't see all that much, is his kind of frailty and his lack of self-belief. We're told he was scared to go to Middle-earth when he was sent there initially. He was scared because he was frightened of Sauron. And all through, like, the Lord of the Rings films, you wouldn't really have picked up on that because he's there. He's this constant guy. He's very focused on what the end goal here is, defeating Sauron. This idea that he's frightened of him in some way doesn't really come out. But within that scene and a couple of other scenes, it's as if Gandalf has found somebody, a very rare person within Middle Earth, who he can actually pause and show himself to. Galadriel is the most powerful elf in Middle Earth. She has lived um, in Valinor, so she understands where Gandalf has come from. She understands who he is at a fundamental level. So their connection is a really strong one. And the idea that he could perhaps be open and honest with her in a way that he couldn't with many others, that does work for me. CK the Cam, do you think they'd ever reboot the Game of Thrones series and let it follow the books more closely, or is this truly a one and done based on costs? Um, without it, without the books, I suspect that they probably wouldn't. If we got, let's imagine we magically got the books, and the ending was there, and people were like, oh yeah, so that's the ending. That's how it should worked. It should have worked. Um, then I could imagine at some point some studio exec going, why don't we try this? Um, so in terms of costs, uh, the world will look very different in 5 to 10 years' time because of AI. Now, um, I'm not doing any kind of judgment here on the goods or ills of that. It's just, I think, a statement of fact. When it comes to creation of entertainment media, the world will look and feel very different in 5 to 10 years' time. And what was once looking beyond costs is now going to suddenly appear potentially doable. Um, I don't think that they will do a live action adaptation of the entire Song of Ice and Fire, even if we got all of the books, because it is so big and it would require such a long period of investment by not just showrunners but actors as well, that they would have to sign them up for 10 to 12 years, which is a huge chunk of time. Um, uh, so I could see this. Similarly, actually, incidentally, I could see that there is a route for something like the Silmarillion being adapted, not as live action, but as animated. And I think there'll be a really good audience for that. I think that they could do justice to it like that. I think that an animated I mean, if you allow me to dream, then why can't we have just one episode for each chapter? Let's give it a go. Can you not do that? It would take forever, but it's entirely possible. Um, I think the real world answer is it in the foreseeable future. No, they're not going to redo it. Partly because we've not got the books, partly because it would be such a huge investment, and partly because although yes, we focus in on the last few seasons and the drop off, this was in and of itself one of the most successful TV show ever. So they tend to be more cautious about trying to redo the most successful things ever. Some successes, yes, they think they can try and recreate that, but something that will have mega fans immediately saying this is or isn't as good as the original, they'll pause before doing that. John Abdul-Masih, Al-Masih, I probably butchered your name. I apologize. Saying, hello, Lord of the Rings question. If you had a chance to ask the man himself about one of the mysteries or unfinished parts of the Legendarium, what would you ask about? For me, it would be the Blue Wizards. I know they turned evil, per the letters, but I'd ask if there was any chance that after they failed to stop Sauron, they decided to bro it up across Middle Earth until they faded away. Yeah, so I mean, this is just, it's my head canon that's what happened, is that they were there. Um, they survived past Sauron's demise, and then it's like, well, hang on a moment, we're we're pretty much the most powerful beings left. If you forget people like Tom Bombadil, Galadriel's gone, Sauron's gone, Gandalf's gone, Saruman's gone, and Radagast is nowhere to be seen. The Balrog's gone, Smaug's gone. You know, are we the most powerful beings? They're here now. I could well imagine that headcanon, they tried to build their own little empires and stuff in the Fourth Age. Which kind of brings me to the thing I would ask, which is what did he think? And he would not want to answer this, but it was worth a go. What would the new Shadow, the sequel that he started writing, where was it going in his mind? because we have it. I did a video on this ages ago if you're interested. So he started writing this sequel to The Lord of the Rings. He got, I think, 13 pages in. He abandoned it. He tried again. He abandoned it. He tried again, and eventually said, "No, I'm not doing it. It's not going to work." And he came out with check out the video if you're interested. But he came out with this, as you would expect from Tolkien, really quite eloquent reason why, which is basically it's that everything's gone dark now, and humanity's reverting back to doing terrible things after the memory of the evil of what happened with Sauron had gone. That meant that people could just start doing terrible things again, and nobody would be standing up and pointing it out. And he just thought this was just going to get too dark. It would just turn into a sort of a thriller, which was not a word he particularly liked. So I would have loved to know where that would have gone, because that would have told me where he saw the fourth age going. Yeah, if I had to ask, and it would not surprise me, given what I said a moment ago, if this was linked into the Blue Wizards. A.D. Ross. Greetings, Sir Robert. Very much enjoyed your recent video on the 9 rings for men, and it got me thinking about the identities of the ring wraiths. Though we don't have much information, Tolkien did indicate the Witch King and 2 others were lords of Numenor, and I think that raises an interesting question of how those lords acquired their rings. I had always assumed they were drawn from the king's men, who were already in Middle-earth, but if they received their rings well before 2000 of the Second Age, this perhaps implies they predate the Numenorian colonization of southwestern Middle-earth, which in turn implies they were still in Numenor. Do you think this would imply Sauron had reached onto the island long before Ar-Pharazôn took him captive? Okay, so I think there are 2 options, although let me start first of all with the distribution of the rings. So there were the 16 rings that Sauron captured. He clearly decided 7 for the 7 dwarf lords. That leaves 9 for humans. We know 1 went to an Easterling, a guy called Khamul. We know 3 went to Numenorians. The others, it kind of makes sense that he spread them around Middle-earth. So probably 1 or 2 went to the north, east, or west. Probably some of them went down into Harad, which just means the south. At the time, the Haradrim were facing the Numenorians, who were sort of landing on their western coast. Over time, this would turn from being landing and trading to landing and we'll build some coastal settlements here, to landing and we've got some coastal settlements and we think you should pay us tribute, to eventually it got really bad to the we're just going to enslave you and kill you. It would make sense to me if Sauron, as is his way, gave some rings of power to the Haradrim to help them oppose the Numenorians, at the same time as he gave some to the Numenorians as they were there slowly strengthening their toehold on sort of southern Middle-earth. So the 2 broad options are, as you've pointed out, either these are Numenorians who have come across to Middle-earth and he's kind of met them there, or they're Numenorians who stayed in Numenor and he somehow had reached out to them. Personally, I think either would work. I don't think he has to have been in a position of power in Numenor in order to actually influence events, hand these rings out. Let's not forget, at this point, he still had the power to change his appearance. He changed his appearance to Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he could change it to whatever else he wanted. So I don't see, and Tolkien was actually just at an even higher level. Tolkien was very open to this idea that other minds and hands, he said, would fill in the blank bits of the canvas, particularly in things like the Second Age. So he was okay with this idea, and one of those blank bits of the canvas definitely is, how were the rings distributed? And in my mind, it makes perfect sense that perhaps he took a couple of years out took on a different physical form, went to Numenor and distributed 3 rings, and then went off and down to Harad and took on another appearance and distributed a couple of rings there, and then went to Harun, to the Easterlings. That makes perfect sense to me. Doesn't have to be the only way this could have happened, but it kind of makes sense to me. The idea that these rings were not given out by somebody who looks like an evil overlord, I think, is quite important, because um, he should be there deceiving people, making them think that they can get power. They should not at any point be thinking, oh, if I take this ring, does that mean Sauron's going to be able to control me? So, yeah, I think either would work. Tolkien didn't tell us, and I think he allowed us to make our own minds up about it. Okay, this is my last question here from my patrons. I will have a quick flick through the chat after that, so now's a good time to drop any last questions in. Kezian Too Late saying, Robert, what are some other settings and worlds you've considered making videos for? From your audiobooks of Conan stories, which, quick plug, if I do audiobooks, The Well Told Tale, a sister channel, a little bit of a passion project, check it out. From your audiobooks of Conan stories, I'd love to learn more about Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age, or the Young Kingdoms of Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné. I always mispronounce that. Or perhaps Lankmar from the Fritz Lieber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Well, obviously, these are less elaborate, detailed settings than the intricate world-building projects of Middle-earth or Westeros. I still think your voice and style would suit them well. Well, thank you very much for that compliment. All of those, I love all of those worlds. I've read many stories in all of them. In terms of what I cover here, so this year we're still keeping on with the 2 main things. It's still going to be Lord of the Rings. It's still going to be A Song of Ice and Fire. The Witcher, as and when people sometimes say, "Oh, well, you've mentioned The Witcher in all of your videos. You don't do many." I will probably do 5 or 6 Witcher videos this year. Just when the muse takes me. So that's what's going on with The Witcher. As for other stuff, I'm very open to expand it out. I think I've been asked the most, I would say, about Dune. I've been asked about the Wheel of Time quite a lot. Um, uh, More recently, like the Cosmere stuff with Brandon Sanderson that I never quite got into, but I'm going to try again, see what the fuss is about there. And yeah, I think those are probably the biggest things that I've been suggested. Some of the older fantasy worlds, like the ones you talk about, love them. I think they're fantastic. I don't know the extent to which there's a demand for people watching videos about that, but hey, could be wrong. So yeah, there's a lot that I've considered over the years. Maybe next year I will start expanding out a little bit more. Okay, and with that, let's have a quick look in the chat. Uh, Carl Klossnark saying there's a good amount of lore in the Conan world to pull from. Yeah, absolutely. Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse are great fun, and now quite as well known as the other. Yeah. Da, 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 quick flick through. Yakiniko, I thought Sauron keeps the physical rings after the Nazgul were enslaved. Why the Witch King lasting 700 years against a coalition led by Elrond, Círdan, Glorfindel should be nothing to scoff at. Yes, so he did, as far as we can tell. Although this does seem to be something that Tolkien may have changed his mind on, because we get slightly different hints at different points in the Legendarium. But yeah, where he seems to have settled down as a sort of a point of principle is that after the 9 became wraiths, he confiscated the rings. He'd got his control over them now, so they didn't have to have those rings. He keeps them in Barad-dûr, which means that they were all destroyed when the One Ring was destroyed. So yeah, that's where the 9 were. Um, Mattia saying, have you seen the articles confirming Aegon's Conquest movie and attaching one of the writers of Andor as the main script writer? Yes, so this is the I talked about this a little bit before. So there are two options which are being progressed. You get the TV show with Matt and Tomlin, who did the Batman, and also the film version, which is one of the writers of Andor. Now, I'm very open to either as an option. I just want to see it. If you had to push me, I would say I really like the idea that we could have the invasion as a film, or even like we could make it a trilogy even, and then go to a TV show for what follows, the Sons of the Dragon. So yeah, I think this is good news all round. The fact that we do not know who's doing it. Well, we know the names of people who are developing stuff. We just don't know what the decision is going to be. I'm relaxed about. Okay, and I think with that, I will start to draw this one to a close. Keep watching the main channel for new content. And if you well, hello everyone on Facebook. If you made it this far, great to see you. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams. If you're watching this on YouTube a bit later, other live streams are done. Appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you, moderators. You are amazing. Please do give them a little bit of love on the way out. Thank you, patrons. I hugely appreciate you too. Take care, everyone, and I shall see you next week.